Good morning. Welcome to day two of the 12th annual SLO Symposium. My name is Jarek Janio. I'm a faculty coordinator at Santa Ana College School of Continuing Education, and I'm also the founder of the symposium. This event has been made possible through the collaboration of the Coaches Group and Fresno City College, which has generously provided technical support, Zoom hosting, logistical assistance for the symposium. We are forever grateful. I'd like to take a moment to highlight some of the resources that we've developed to help you stay informed about the latest in the assessment of student learning. These resources include Canvas and Outcomes Group that's led by Michelle Dunbar from California State University, Dominguez Hills, the Coaches blog, YouTube channel. We even have two podcast channels made possible with help of AI tools. That's something that we are going to discuss later today as well. The next, please make a note on your calendar, the next Friday SLO Talk series for spring 2025 will start on Friday, February 28, 2025. Additionally, I would like to recognize the Grant Challenges in Assessment Group and the Assessment Institute at Indiana University for their support and collaboration with coaches. We are excited about continuing to build partnership with others in the field. If you share your passion for assessment of student learning, I encourage you to get involved with coaches. We are a volunteers group, and we are always looking for individuals who can contribute their time and expertise. Feel free to email us at info@coaches.institute to join the team. Now, I would like to hand things over to my colleague, Enrique Jauregui, SLO coordinator from Fresno City College, who will introduce the next part of the program. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Jarek, for those kind words. Once again, my name is Enrique Jauregui. I am the SLO coordinator for Fresno City College, located in the Central Valley of California. I want to welcome you all to day two. If you're new, welcome. And if you're here yesterday, welcome again. So I just want to thank the coaches group for this wonderful symposium and having the opportunity to work with them. It's a blessing. I also want to thank Susie Nisu for doing this wonderful job working behind the scenes. So I want to thank everyone also for attending. And without your participation, this conference wouldn't be couldn't happen, right? So I want to thank everyone. At this time, I'd like to introduce our esteemed colleague, Dr. Lisa Gaetje, if you're here, go ahead.
I am here. Good morning, Enrique. I just wanted to welcome everyone this morning. My name is Dr. Lisa Gaetje. I am the Vice President of Instruction at Fresno City College. And we, of course, as was mentioned, are hosting and happy to do so, coming to you from Central California. So again, I'll reiterate what Enrique said, that we're thrilled to be hosting. We're so happy we all have this opportunity to share ideas and resources and education. And hopefully for those of you who attended yesterday, you were able to really engage in all of that work and use this place for those deep conversations. And for those of you new today, welcome. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're willing to spend a Saturday morning with us. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Gaetje, for all your support. As the Vice President of Instruction, thank you for your support from Fresno City College. It really means a lot. Thank you. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Amanda Taintor from Really College.
Good morning and welcome to the day two of the 12th annual SLO Symposium. It's been such a privilege to be able to serve as the president of coaches these last couple of years, collaborating with an incredible group of individuals who I'll introduce shortly. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. Ready for the next slide, Enrique? Organizing the SLO Symposium is truly a team effort, and we want to extend our heartfelt thanks to all the coaches for their dedication, not just to the symposium, but also to the Friday SLO talks that are given throughout the year. I want to give a special shout out to Enrique, Jarek, and Susie, whose vision and hard work have been the driving force behind making the SLO Symposium such a success. So today's agenda You can see today's agenda. It's outlining and engaging thought-provoking sessions that we have planned for you. We're really excited to begin with our plenary speaker, Dr. Karen Singer-Freeman, who will address the challenges in assessment, followed by insightful contributions from Marty Alvarado, Matthew Morin, Trelisa, Glazatov, and Nickawanna Shaw. Each of these sessions will feature expert moderators, the coaches, guiding the discussion to ensure a dynamic and impactful experience. We'll conclude with an evaluation at the end of the day, so don't forget to come back so we can see your thoughts of the symposium and our next steps. We also wanted to extend our heartfelt thanks to the colleges that have sponsored the SLO Symposium and supported their SLO coordinators' participation in the coaches group. Your commitment to fostering collaboration and innovation in assessment has made this event and our year-round efforts absolutely possible. We really appreciate your investment in this vital work that we do. Bethany, would you like to introduce our plenary speaker?
I absolutely would. Good morning, everyone. Happy Spring 25 semester and happy Lunar New Year. It's my pleasure to introduce our plenary speaker for Day 2, Dr. Karen Singer-Freeman, Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning Excellence and leader of the Center for Teaching Excellence at the George Washington University. Dr. Singer-Freeman earned her PhD in Cognitive Developmental Psychology from the University of Minnesota and has dedicated her career to advancing educational interventions that support underserved students. Currently, she directs the Grand Challenges in Assessment in Higher Education project, serves as the external evaluator for the Physics and Astronomy Faculty Teaching Institute, and supports several national grants, including an NSF IUSE project. She's an expert in culturally relevant assessment, AI applications in higher education, and the scholarship of teaching and learning, and regularly leads workshops and strategic planning initiatives. Dr. Singer-Freeman's extensive experience includes leadership roles at Wake Forest University, UNC Charlotte, and SUNY Purchase College, where she serves as the Department Chair of Psychology. Among her many accolades, she's a recipient of the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching, has been recognized as a scientific thinking and integrative reasoning scholar by the AACNU, and was named Assessment Influencer by the Assessment Institute. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Karen Singer-Freeman as she shares her insights with us today.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Let me get myself sharing here. Okay, are we good? Everybody can see this? Great. Well, I just want to thank coaches and everybody for showing up this morning and inviting me to come here. I have felt like coaches is a kindred effort to the Grand Challenges Project. And so, you know, having the opportunity to speak to this group again, having previously spoken, is wonderful. And, you know, just even giving this talk on a Saturday morning when people are choosing to spend their time thinking about assessment and coming together, to me is exactly the sort of culture and ethos that makes me a very happy member of the assessment community, and I think was the driving force behind the Grand Challenges in Assessment project. So I was asked to talk about Grand Challenges today. And I'm going to sort of couch that from the perspective of this Grand Challenges project. I know, having scanned the names on the session, that we have people who've contributed in various ways. And I hope, you know, some of you might choose to join us in the future if you haven't yet. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the Grand Challenges Project is. I'm going to tell you some of our exciting updates, and I'm going to tell you how I think they relate broadly to challenges we face in assessment today. And then I'm hoping to leave a little bit of time for conversation at the end to think about both sort of, you know, where are each of you tackling challenges and whether you believe these challenges are sort of the right challenges to be moving ahead in our future. So what is a grand challenge? A grand challenge is defined. So grand challenges exist in many, many different disciplines. So if you Google grand challenges, you'll find grand challenges in environmental protection, engineering, space travel, public health. And so quite a while ago, this idea came up that you should identify these challenges that can bring together a community. And there's 4 features that make something a grand challenge. So the first one is that they are difficult to solve, but solvable. And, you know, as was mentioned in the introduction, I've done some strategic planning work. And I think, you know, this is at the heart of effective planning in any domain. But if something's easy, we don't need to cooperate to get it done. And if something's impossible, we don't want to waste our time trying to cooperate to get it done. But if we're going to ask people to come together to work on a problem, we want to make sure that it's sort of in that just right, not too hot, not too cold, right? It's got to be difficult. It's got to take cooperation. It's got to take sustained effort, but it also has to be doable. The second feature of a grand challenge is that it has to allow progress to be measured so we know when we've succeeded. And so I don't think I need to convince assessment folks that this is a valuable element to consider, but this really has to do with can we track our progress. The third one is it's got to make an important difference for lots of people. You know, if you each think back to your first intersection with the assessment of student learning, for me, that's an interesting exercise. So my first interaction was my first year as a faculty member. I was tapped to meet with the assessment person at Purchase College, State University of New York, to help him draft student learning outcomes for social science general education classes. And I remember at first being completely befuddled by what this guy wanted from me. And, you know, at that point, I was so immersed in my own discipline of cognitive development in, you know, in young children, that the idea that anybody taking my child development class should learn the same things as somebody taking an intro sociology class or, you know, even something more distant seemed just inconceivable. And then he said, well, why do you think we have these general education requirements? And, you know, we sort of had this rich conversation, and all of a sudden I came out of it and had a more like 360 view of higher education. Again, first year as a professor, because I was like, oh, right. It's not the content matters, but there's something beyond the content that we're trying to teach students. And so I think when we move the needle in our work with faculty and students around the assessment of student learning, we have the potential to help both of those groups really see that, you know, the reason we give so much flexibility in the actual courses students take is because there's some core things within many of those courses that students are achieving. So that's my thoughts about that one. And then the last one is you have to be able to attract popular support to get the work done. And so almost 10 years ago, I arrived at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte with my current Grand Challenges co-director, Christine Robinson, and she had this big whiteboard in our office with all of her big ideas. And so, you know, we were sort of shooting the breeze, and one of the early things she was hoping was maybe we could start an assessment journal at UNC Charlotte. And so we were talking about, well, what is it that, where's the gap, right? And I came up with this idea, being a social science researcher, well, maybe we should survey the community about what are the issues facing assessment that we need to dig into a little deeper. And a dear colleague of hers was actually involved in a Grand Challenges Mathematics Education project. And that was really where this came from. Let's find out what matters to people. And then as we found that out, rather than founding a journal, we ended up founding the Grand Challenges Project. So how did we do that? I did a quick and dirty review of every single article I could find from the last 5 years that was forward-looking in assessment. And on the basis of that very fast literature review, I drafted 10 potential grand challenges that I thought might, you know, fit the bill for that. And then we floated that around to some of the people who are now on our advisory board, like Natasha Jankowski and Lisa Jane Marie Sousa, Keston Fulcher, some of the sort of assessment big people, and they gave us some editorial suggestions, and then we surveyed the community. And I am pretty sure actually some of you completed that survey. And in the survey, we asked folks to tell us to what extent did each of the challenges in that list of 10 meet the criterion for the grand challenges. So each of those 4 things I showed you on the first slide. And then we asked them to rank order the challenges and provide any other challenges that they thought might be important. Out of that process, we identified 4 challenges in 2020, and we started going around to conferences and talking to people about them. And we also published a NILOA paper and a research and practice and assessment paper on the whole process of identifying those challenges. And those are both on our website. You can see them if you want to find out what all 10 challenges were. And when we were at the AALHE conference, which was the first place we presented it, a few of the people who'd helped us with some of the editorial work on the challenges got together with us and said, well, maybe this would be an opportunity to engage in some strategic planning around these challenges. And so that was where the idea of a national project was first born. In 2021, we published the 3 plans. So we drafted, at that point, we drafted an advisory board, which I think started off with 7 organizations. Now we're up to 10 who endorsed the project, and we drafted writing teams. And for a whole year, those teams met remotely. And the 4 plans actually got condensed to 3 plans. We did peer review and national review and advisory board review. And then in 2021, we published those plans, and you can still see them on our website. And we transitioned from writing teams to implementation teams, which are still working today. We started really doing a lot of dissemination in 2022 when we launched an assessment update column, making a grand contribution. And I should say the plans have both national tactics and local tactics. So the idea was the implementation teams would work a lot on the national tactics, and then we would disseminate the local tactics to people across the assessment community so that they could be taking local steps on their campuses. 2023, we offered an Assessment Institute webinar series, which is still available and also linked on our website. And in 2024, we really launched a lot of new website content to support work towards these challenges. And I'll be sort of highlighting some of those things with you today. So this just gives you a sense of our structure. The project was founded by me and Dr. Christine Robinson, and last year we brought Jessica Taylor on as an associate director. She's been with the project from the very beginning, first on a writing team and then being the coordinator for one of our implementation teams throughout the project. We now have 10 endorsing organizations that you can see listed here, and each endorsing organization has a leader that sits on our advisory board. And then we have 3 teams that are functioning, with each team having some sub teams. And you can see our team, implementation team leaders here. So what are the challenges? I'm 10 minutes in and I haven't told you that. So as I said, the 10 challenges were winnowed to 4, which were then winnowed further to 3. And they're rich. So the first challenge is this idea that we have to make assessment findings actionable and visible to drive innovation. And I'll unpack that a little bit for you. One challenge that was talked about 5 years ago in the literature quite a bit was this idea that for our jobs to have maximal value and for us to help higher education the most, it's essential that we are collecting good information, right? So not just information where people are treating their assessment of student learning as a tax return, something they do that goes into a file drawer and they never think about or see again, but rather something that actually has meaning and tells them something that can potentially improve their practice and tells students and parents and academic leaders, right? So that's this idea of making assessment findings actionable. How do we improve what we're measuring so that it's useful to people? But then a second piece of the challenge with actually having assessment drive improvement was that we need what we find to be visible to the stakeholders. So it's not enough to have good data if you don't have the people who are making the decisions, whether they be faculty members, students, parents, or academic leadership. If they're not seeing the data, and if they're not seeing it in a format that they can understand and act on, then we're not making a difference. And so if we achieve those two things, then potentially we can drive innovation and improvement in higher education much more effectively than we have been to date. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge focused primarily now just on the classroom. So this was the idea that we had to do a better job using assessment findings to create rapid improvements in pedagogy. And so there's a lot of synergy between this and the learning improvement movement, which some of you may have come across. The idea here is we don't want it to take 2-3 years before somebody learns something from the assessing that they're doing in the classroom. So ideally, we want to encourage formative assessment where faculty are actually collecting information about student learning throughout the semester, and that information is shaping what they do next. In the original challenge, we talked about things like adaptive learning platforms like Alex and other ones that have emerged as ways this might happen, right? So it could be that technology will actually evaluate student learning and immediately shape the learning experiences students have. But this challenge also has to do with those more traditional, muddiest point questions or things like that. And then the final challenge was using assessment findings to increase equity. And so the crux of this idea is that it's not enough to say that 80 or 90% of students are meeting a learning outcome in a course, in general education, in a major. If the 10% or 15% or 20% are students who in some way lack privilege. So if none of your transfer students are meeting your learning outcomes, you are not using that assessment of learning to advance education for all students. If none of your minoritized students are meeting a learning outcome, those things are a problem. So the crux of this idea is we need to think really carefully about how is it that we determine that a program or a course or an institution is effectively educating its students, and how do we dig into those individual differences among student achievement that may be important. And so now I'm going to spend the next 15 or 20 minutes sort of telling you what we've done in each of these, and I think that'll flesh out a little bit more of our approach to them. Oh, but first I'll tell you our mission and our vision. So our mission is to address grand challenges in higher education assessment through national collaborations, systemic inquiries, and dissemination of practical solutions. So grand challenges function really differently depending on the domain. And so in many domains, you see collaborative grants or sharing of data across a huge field that's trying to develop vaccines more quickly or clean energy more quickly. When we think about what the assessment community needs, or when I think about it, I think there's two things. And this is where I see synergy with coaches. I think the first thing is we need opportunities to function as a community because there's not that many assessment folks in any one institution. And I think that's why we have so many people coming to a meeting like this. And that's why we've had so many hundreds of people contribute to the Grand Challenges Project. Projects like these give people a place to come together as a community and have that rich discussion and problem solving where you have lots of people that have shared experiences, but also different environments. And then the second thing is we are such a creative and energetic community, and we need to do a better job of sharing the inventions that each of us have made. So the Assess listserv does a wonderful job of sort of sharing information and crowdsourcing ideas. But I think the mission of our project is to be another source of that sort of shared information. And our vision is to increase the use of, of assessment practices that support these three challenges. So now, as I'm going through the slides, anything that's underlined is an active link. And I did put the link to the slide deck in the chat right when I started speaking, and I believe it's also available on the coach's website. So the first challenge is this idea of making assessment findings actionable and visible to drive innovation. And if you click that link right up at the top, it takes you to the web page on our website that's devoted to that. Within each of our challenges, we have objectives, and within each of the objectives, if you actually go to the plans, you'll see national tactics. So that's things that we're doing on our implementation teams, and local tactics, which are things that you could do individually on your campus. So this first idea is, how do we make assessment findings visible? That's our first objective within that. And we've been doing a lot of work on data visualization. So how do you create graphs, figures, PowerPoints, Google Docs that are going to effectively communicate assessment findings that are complicated to non-expert audience? And then a second piece of that, which we worked on, especially during the beginning, was this idea that assessment practitioners need to become more experienced data storytellers. So rather than just saying, you know, here's our assessment report, 80% of students are, you know, satisfactory, we need to say, what's the importance of this student learning outcome? How was it measured? And what's the value of that measurement? Or what might we want to consider as a better measurement? What are the nuances of these findings? So even though maybe we have 80% achieving success, is there a story to tell in there in terms of sub-elements that were measured on a rubric or things like that? And what are the questions people might want to ask, and what might they want to do with it? So really creating narratives around our data. The second objective within this challenge is the idea that we need to advance innovative approaches to making findings actionable. And so during the first year of implementation, we did a lot of work on implementation fidelity, which is the idea that, you know, we all have great plans about what we're going to do. And oftentimes when we're assessing what we did, we just assume it went as planned. But that rarely happens. So since this project launched, we have had COVID, we've had generative AI come on the scene, and all those things have been very disruptive to teaching. And so, you know, in a nutshell, the idea behind implementation fidelity is this idea that when we're building evaluation plans, we need to build in a chance for people to reflect on what went as planned and what didn't go as planned. And then when we're interpreting those findings, we need to refer back to that and determine, was it that this wasn't a successful way of teaching this concept, or was it that something went wrong in the implementation of how we were planning to teach the concept? So it's a pretty simple idea, but it's something that I think we can do a much better job as a community making part of our assessment practices. And it also feeds that data storytelling I was talking about a minute ago. The other thing is that we work towards this culture shift, that too often when faculty are assessing student learning, they feel that they themselves are being assessed, right? Am I an adequate teacher? And therefore they have the feeling that they can only talk about successes, and that they need to spin things to indicate that their students are learning in a sufficient way, rather than using it as a reflective process. And so we need to shift the culture away from the value of assessment being proving that you're teaching adequately, to the idea that the value of assessment is identifying ways that you can teach better. And so this is this idea of the value of promising failures. And we have a paper on that on our website. And then within the third stream, this idea of innovative approaches to institutional excellence. As we make our assessment data better and more visible, then we need to have planning throughout institutions integrated, so that the highest level decisions are taking into account assessment findings, whether they're assessment of student learning or assessment of big programs that we might put in place for students. So what's new? Ooh. Did my screen just do something wonky for you?
You're still sharing the screen.
I am. Okay. All of a sudden, my screen looked very different to me. Thank you. So I'm about to launch our winter newsletter, which is completely dedicated to our new data visualization toolkit. And so this is just a screenshot of the newsletter. It's not clickable. You will have an opportunity to sign up for our mailing list, and then you'll get your own clickable copy. But as you can see here, this data visualization toolkit has all these different tabs that provide information on lots of the different elements that's designed for novices, right? People who don't feel like they're expert data storytellers, to improve the way they are talking to non-experts about assessment findings. We also have 2 recent papers that came out in that column that I told you about in assessment update. So the first one is thinking about integrated planning. And the second one is, again, sort of, it was launching this data visualization platform and talking about what's in there. And then we have a great webinar on implementation fidelity. And, 2 webinars that are part of that Assessment Institute Grand Challenges free webinar series. So the first is implementation fidelity, if you want to learn more about that. And the second one is on data visualization, again, what we've really been dedicating a lot of time to. Now, on top of that, if you just go to the web page, you'll see we have many, many, many articles on pretty much everything that I mentioned on the previous slides. So now let's move to our second challenge, this idea of using assessment for rapid improvements in pedagogy. And I'm sorry, I neglected to say on the last slide, the co-chairs of each group are listed here on the right. So our co-chairs for this group are Chadia Abras and Jessica Taylor, and Jessica, of course, is also our associate director. So there's 2 elements of the goal of using assessment to rapidly improve pedagogy. The first is not immediately intuitive, but as we thought about how is it that we make assessment findings usable by faculty for rapid improvement, we realized that a first element is we have to improve the extent to which assessment findings are measuring changes in learning over time. I mentioned that my background is as a developmental psychologist, so my training is really on the idea that the most important types of learning we can measure are developmental changes, right? Not just how much does somebody know, but how much did this experience change their knowledge? And that's essential because I was a classroom teacher for 20 years, and I know how easy it is to believe you're teaching students if 5 out of 50 get a question right on a test. And the problem with that is if you don't know what they knew when they came into your class, you may not have taught that at all. And it may just be that they came in knowing that. And so, we're going to get to equity in a minute, but when we think about our institutions, the purpose of student learning evaluation was really to try and drive our institutions to ensure that we're providing students with the education they came to receive. And if we just measure what they know, there's really no way to do that. And so the team has spent a lot of time thinking about how is it that we measure learning in different contexts. And so, when I'm saying learning, inherent in that is the overtime. Right? So how is it that if we want to look at co-curricular learning, that we figure out what is it students knew when they came in and how did that knowledge change from this experience? And so then the second element here is tracking changes in learning. And then the other thing which the group is really just starting to get into is how is it, once we're better at measuring learning, that we come up with ways to support faculty using that information to make rapid changes in their teaching that will support greater improvements in learning. And so there's 2 threads to this. The first is the use of sort of traditional formative measures of learning to adapt teaching. And to my knowledge, nobody's done this yet. There's some programs that now will use the same rubric or the same measure to assess learning in their students across their college education. But I've not yet come across anybody who's actually using the same measure or rubric within a class to track their learning towards a learning outcome. And I think that's a potentially very promising way to bring this into a classroom in a way that would drive those sorts of formative changes in teaching. And the second one, which disappeared, is adaptive learning technologies like ALEX and things like that, and generative AI. So what's new? If you go to the website, we have a lovely thing called the Faculty Showcase that actually is describing, it's interviews with faculty that describes in a fair amount of detail ways that they are actually using formative assessments to shape their teaching within the space of a single class. We have a webinar on improving the measurement of learning over time, and it goes into a fair amount of detail about measuring learning in different types of contexts. So co-curricular learning, extracurricular learning, curricular learning, as well as different measures of learning. So multiple choice tests is something they consider. And then there's a recent paper that I actually wrote in Assessment Update that's tackling multiple choice questions from the perspective of how do we write multiple choice questions that can actually measure changes in learning rather than previous knowledge. We know that multiple choice questions aren't going away. And when you're thinking about large classes and consistent assessment of student learning over time and across the curriculum, they have value. So this article is trying to look at some sort of best practices in multiple choice test question creation from the perspective of measuring learning rather than measuring knowledge. And then finally, we have our equity group. And so they have 3 objectives they've been working towards, and you can see the co-chairs listed here on the right. So we have Beth Janetsky and Lauren Catherine Neal. The first is to promote and create equitable assessment practices. And so they've done a lot of work gathering tools and examples of best practices, which we try to share on the website. We also have a second thread, which is this idea of increasing the professional development opportunities that support the practice of equitable assessment. And so at Assessment Institute and ALEG, we've been offering workshops on equitable assessment, and that's something that I do a fair amount of. We also have webinars and talks and articles that are available on the website. And then the third is one that we're just really starting to crack into a little bit, but this was the idea of engaging with existing structures to increase equity. So right now, the team is reviewing accreditation standards to see where equity falls within them. Now, with the events of the last week, that may well change dramatically over the last year, and that will be interesting to track as well. But the idea here is, for example, if accrediting bodies require the disaggregation of assessment findings to determine whether all groups of students with an institution are showing equal gains in learning, that's going to be a strong driver towards supporting equity in the assessment of learning. They are also interested eventually in looking at some of the national surveys to evaluate whether the questions are culturally responsive and things like that. So what's new with them? They have this lovely Equity Action Makers series, which now has, I believe, 30 interviews with different people that are doing equity work across the country. They also recently published a paper about ways assessment professionals can act as change agents in their institution. And they have a LinkedIn channel that is about data disaggregation and its role in supporting equity in higher education. So now I would love to turn it over to thoughts and discussion. And, one sort of equity practice, if you just ask people if they have any questions, they're less likely to engage. But if you actually provide more direction in the sort of discussion that you might want to have, it oftentimes encourages more people to engage. And so I have two sort of guiding questions for this discussion. The first is, are these still the right challenges? So, we've had dramatic shift in this country in the last 2 weeks in terms of policy, but there's also been a lot of change since this project began in 2019, both in terms of the pandemic, but also now with generative AI. And are there things that we should be considering that these challenges aren't considering? And then the sort of second question is whether what I've said resonates with you in terms of ways that we might be addressing each of these challenges that I introduced this morning. And so with that, I would welcome, I think people can unmute and just talk, or people can write questions or thoughts in the chat and I can read them out, whatever people prefer. And I think I never shared the link to my slides before. Okay, so from Julie, who has been participating in the project for quite a while, she'd love to hear more about how we see generative AI affecting this work. The talk I actually gave to coaches about 6 months ago or a year ago was on that and ways that generative AI can be supporting this work. I think within the classroom, there's enormous potential from generative AI to provide faculty with formative guidance that would improve their teaching, but also to provide students with formative guidance that can support their learning. So there's a lot of faculty right now playing around with specialized chatbots where the faculty member can program the chatbot so that it only uses reliable sources and interacts with students in the way that the faculty member sees as pedagogically most useful to help them develop deeper research questions or to understand complex material. So I think there's a lot of promise there. I think there's enormous promise in terms of helping us tell our stories more effectively. So when you think about that data storytelling and data visualization, people have already been using generative AI to give them examples of how you might describe a finding for different audiences or different analogies you could use for people with different levels of expertise. And so, those are some of the ways that I think that's very promising. And then I see a question about improving assessment quality or variety within innovation and equity. Oh, now there's so much. Let me expand this.
Dr. Singer,
yes.
The first one, improving, pedagogical changes in assessment. Can you elaborate more on that?
Explain a little bit more what you mean. Like, how do we speed the pedagogical changes?
Yes.
So, in real time, using sort of traditional methods, I think the examples of that type of thing is where a faculty member might ask muddiest point types of questions, if you're familiar with that, and then change what they teach the next day based on what they've determined. When we think about how we could drive that as assessment professionals, when you're creating assessment plans with your faculty, rather than encouraging just a summative assessment at the end of a semester to demonstrate what percentage of students are achieving each learning outcome or the different elements of a learning outcome, if instead you create assessment plans where faculty are doing that at multiple points in the semester, and then making small changes based on where they see weakness. Those are the kind of assessment plans that can drive that and support that work. If you think about generative AI, then these chatbots that I was trying to describe, but I don't think I did very well, can be actually trained to ask students questions based on the quality of their previous answer or direct them to sort of next activities they should do. And there's existing platforms like Alex, which is a math learning platform that will, a student tries a problem. If they get it right, they get a more difficult problem. If they get it wrong, they'll be directed to the information they should review and get a simpler problem until they get it right. And so as generative AI is exploding in higher ed, I think we're going to see many more types of learning platforms. From an assessment standpoint, if you think about the data those types of programs are collecting, then we can start to collect really nuanced assessment findings about how interacting with those platforms leads to changes in learning over time, as well as the long-term final outcome. Does that?
Yes, it does. And do you feel that the faculty interactions are welcoming from the faculty, or you getting some pushback, or?
You know, it's the gamut, right? So the faculty showcase is the faculty who are really welcoming it. You know, you get faculty like me who the first time I heard about assessment, I was like, that makes no sense. And then I, you know, really embraced it. So depending on your institutional culture, I think it can vary dramatically. I think, you know, one of the things I didn't say at the beginning, but really came out when I launched this project, was that the assessment community has fully embraced this idea that we need to be using assessment for improvement rather than for compliance. And so to whatever extent we can move that objective of using assessment findings to drive rapid improvements in pedagogy, that's going to convince faculty that assessment is valuable to them and is leading to improvements in things that matter to them. So it's a long answer. Basically, no, you won't, you know, you will get resistance, but you'll also get a lot of faculty who will really be excited by the opportunity to learn ways to be more effective in their teaching. I think I'm running a little short on time, so I'm going to move to the next slide, but I'm happy to continue talking as long as I don't remember exactly when you guys told me to wrap up. But the final slide, just our website has a ton of information. We are actually writing a book proposal right now. So I think we're hoping 2 years from now to have a book coming out, so look for that. And if you're not already on our mailing list, or if you want to join a working group, on our website, you can actually see all of the people who are currently on each working group and what institution they come from. You can also see everybody who's previously been on a working group. And there's also a link if you want to be on our mailing list or to join a group. And with that, I don't know, do I have more time for conversation, or am I out? Yes, I'm seeing. So I don't know if any of the moderators have looked over this wealth of questions and would like to feed another question to me, or I can read them myself and pick something.
Amanda or Bethany? Do you have any?
Generative AI is definitely a hot topic, and I think you did discuss that. Tracy's question is interesting. Within innovation and equity, what are the best strategies or ways to scale improvements in student learning and close institutional gaps? I don't know if you have enough time for such a question, but however you want to tackle that one would be great.
Yeah, I think I'll start off with the thread of equity, because I think that you know, that's a huge concern this week for many people. And I worked for 8 years in North Carolina, which was already having statewide concerns around equity. And so I think we've just entered a very challenging landscape for explicitly working to increase equity in higher education. But I believe that there's still likely to be support for the idea that higher education has a responsibility to educate every student who enters. And so I think the equity language is something, when you're wanting to institutionally scale up, that we probably are going to have to move away from. But when we think about accrediting standards that currently have equity language, I'm hoping that's going to be replaced with the idea that higher education owes an equal education to all students who are admitted. And then one of the most effective ways to widely scale up equity differences, I believe, has been the creation of dashboards that provide faculty with training and then give them access after they've submitted their grades or their assessment data to see what was the distribution of acquisition across different groups. So male versus females, transfer students versus continuing students, first generation versus continuing generation students, as well as racial minority groups or English language learners. And almost uniformly, when I've done that work with faculty, what they discover is a highly disproportionate percentage of the students who aren't achieving learning outcomes or aren't passing classes are coming from one of these subgroups. And that awareness drives what Esther Ben-Simon talks about as a, now I'm forgetting her terminology, but basically a culture of equity. And that's not her language. She uses better language, but the faculty become engaged in the problem, right? Faculty don't like to think that the students who aren't learning in their classes are in some way, it's a result of their behavior. And so when they see these uneven distributions, it can lead faculty to engage with trying to improve their teaching pretty deeply. And then the great thing is, if you have a dashboard, you can actually try something and get some immediate feedback about whether it worked or not. In terms of scaling up the improvement, and do I still have time? Somebody nod and tell me if I'm okay or if I need to skip innovation.
About 3 more minutes.
Okay, so in terms of innovation, when we're improving visibility and quality of assessment findings, I think what we ask and how we train faculty around collecting assessment data has the power to have enormous institutional impact. So I think that's in a lot of ways a whole lot easier than the equity piece of this. So, for those of you at large institutions, you're almost certainly using some software to collect your assessment data and thinking really carefully about what are the cells that people are filling in. When somebody has to go into a form and fill something out, it evokes psychologically sort of like a tax return mentality, that they think this is something stupid that I just have to do and it doesn't matter. So you have to work against that if you're using one of these big data collection platforms rather than a narrative report. But including a question like, what was your plan? And then in what ways, were there any things that went wrong? Right there, that question is going to ask people to think about the implementation fidelity. And then, rather than did 80% meet the learning outcome in the form, asking, what was the sub element of the rubric or whatever it is that students did the worst on? So putting questions like that in that are getting people to focus on where the weakest element was rather than did they pass? And what are 3 creative things you might do to address that challenge for your students? And then which of those 3 do you think you will do? The difference between just saying, how are you going to respond, right? How are you going to respond doesn't generate sort of that reflection that we want people to engage in about their teaching. But as soon as we ask them for multiple ways they might respond, then we're more likely to. And there's other ideas, which I'd be happy to talk to anybody about offline, but that's just one. I think I'm about at my 3 minutes. Would these dashboards you mentioned be in the learning management system? I think that would be difficult. Usually the dashboards are built apart from that. But I think putting, this is another challenge I have for the assessment community. I think we've moved too far away from using grades for assessment, because I think faculty care a lot about their grades. And so thinking about whether putting assessments into the learning management system and allowing targeted grades to be used for assessments of learning. So not, your final grade in the course, but maybe 5 points on an exam that a faculty member is already using that relates specifically to a concept. And the value of that is if we start to work with faculty around developing assessments of learning that they use for grades that are also focused on key learning outcomes for the course, then we're working towards that idea that they're going to improve their pedagogy, because we're merging those things. And I know I'm like now just babbling, so I will be quiet. And thank you for your attention and your questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I assume your contact information, oh yeah, it was on the last slide, so I'm sure you will welcome follow up. There was some questions that came in, and time is a thief, and we have to move on to our next presenter. So I can't remember if it's Bethany or Michelle who is introducing.
It's me.
All right, take it away, Bethany.
All righty. So I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Marty Alvarado, a partner at Sova, where she works to drive large-scale change in higher education and workforce development through actionable strategies and equity-focused solutions. Marty brings over 2 decades of experience as a transformative leader in education. She previously served as the Executive Vice Chancellor for the Office of Equitable Student Learning Experience and Impact at the California Community College Chancellor's Office, where she led initiatives that reshaped the state's 116 campus community college system. Her leadership spanned critical areas such as guided pathways, competency-based education, and remedial education reform, all with an unwavering commitment to equity, access, and student success. During her tenure, Marty also navigated the system through the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, pivoting instruction and support services online while advocating for budget allocations and systemic reforms that prioritized underserved communities. At Sova, Marty continues her mission of empowering leaders and institutions to fulfill America's promise of equitable upward mobility through higher education. Her expertise and passion for lifelong learning makes her a sought-after speaker and advisor on equity, inclusion, and transformative education. Please join me in welcoming Marty Alvarado as she shares her insights with us today.
Thank you so much, Bethany. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. It is a joy to be with you all, genuinely, deeply a joy. I will share a quick story as I get started and say, I've talked about our California work nationally with many of my partners at different organizations, and folks sort of look at me a little bit crazy, like, sure. And then I had a colleague from JFF who joined one of these SLO sessions, convenings, and was like, oh my gosh, the chat, the faculty, everyone was amazing. They're talking about all the things you're talking about. And I'm like, exactly. And I got a text message during the convening that said, I found your people. And I'm like, I'm not sure what that means, if it's a good or bad thing, but then learned it was amazing. So just really excited to be with you all today, and really excited about the work that is happening in California, because it is not happening anywhere that I've seen nationally. With that, I want to talk a little bit about education in the age of information today. I want to try on some new ideas that we are playing with, given that you all are at the forefront of education, I don't know, evolution, I'll say. I wanted to really request active feedback and engagement. So would love to hear your thoughts throughout this presentation, what's resonating, where are you disagreeing, right? Where are you like, nope, I'm not believing it. Would love your active engagement in the chat. It'll be great. It would be great, very helpful for us at Sova as we continue to evolve our work. So with that ask in mind, let me get started by sharing a story. And I'm going to start with this title slide, Practice Makes, and would love for you all to put in the chat, practice makes what? This is not a trick question. I think folks will have one of two answers. Would love to hear them. I was recently giving a talk in Oregon to a number of community college leaders, and we were talking about the evolution of higher ed and AI and all the things, and the new generation, right? What is the language of Gen Z? What is the slang of Gen Z, et cetera? I was right after lunch, so I needed to get them engaged and active, if you will, and I was in the room. And I have told this story about practice makes perfect, practice makes whatever, a number of times here in California and in other places. And so I assumed, in this age of information, that people have access to the information that I have access to, or that it is very common information, right? And so as I was standing there, I alluded very quickly to my typical story on practice makes perfect, and the murmurs in the room sort of had me pause, and the looks, and I said, time out, let me go back, let me pause. Have folks heard the expression, practice makes progress, right? My kindergartner was overjoyed, right, that she that her dad and I got it wrong at dinner when we said practice makes perfect. And I'm loving all of the comments in the chat. And they were floored, right? When she was like, practice makes progress, right? And because we're talking about what we need to unlearn, what we need to learn new, etc. They were so floored that I was invited back to meet with their, or to present to their economic development, regional economic development group. And they were like, I asked, what would you like? I'm kind of a higher ed person. I dabble in workforce and economic development. And they said, well, if you just say practice makes progress instead of practice makes perfect, that would be a win right there, right? And I was floored at how uncommon or that folks didn't have access to this. And the reveal is that my daughter's now 18. So we are 13 years away from kindergarten, where we first learned this expression, right? So what this highlighted for me as I was thinking about this presentation, right, is in this age of information where there is a ton of information everywhere. Part of what we in higher education are wrestling with, right, is unlearning what we grew up with, perhaps. And this is just a simple example of it, right? If this idea of practice makes perfect needs to evolve into practice makes progress, part of that is because our information set is perpetually changing. Our job market is perpetually changing, right? The development of new content is perpetually changing. And so how do we really think about the paradigm shift within higher education as we have to absorb new information and integrate it into what we do in order to be effective at education? And what this made me, what we have been talking about relative to this concept is this idea of built for purpose, right? And I'm gonna apologize. There's a little bit of reading slides at you throughout this presentation, but only because I've gotten the feedback that just having the words on here isn't helpful when people want to access the slides after the presentation. So I've tried to add as much content as is palatable. But let me really focus in here for a minute on built for purpose. We all talk about this. We all know this. The question is, what is the action we have to take if given that we know this? But what I learned from that Oregon presentation, I can't assume that we all know this, right? I think we know this, but have we really wrestled with it and internalized it? And then have we been exposed to it, right? So for an industrial economy, right, which was really the foundation of our current higher education system, right? Our focus was really around schools churning out workers for specific tasks in factories. And we've come a long way since then, but fundamentally, we are structured for this purpose. Rote memorization, efficiency, discipline, very focused and compartmentalized, right? You have an accounting department over here and a logistics program over there. Everything's sort of segmented, right? And I think the thing that really struck me as I was preparing these slides and as we've been talking about this is how much our education rhetoric is historically rooted in this industrial economy paradigm, right? We're going to teach people to show up on time because if they don't show up on time, right, the workforce is not going to tolerate that. And not yes, but no, but no, but yes, right? My favorite expression. And the main focus, right, the overall aim of this was to create a reliable workforce, right? With uniform, efficient production workers in all the different variations, right? Could be management, could be accounting, could be whatever. But that was the culture that we were trying to serve. As we move into a knowledge economy or an information economy, right? The idea here, the focus here is that this is really about equipping learners with the ability to continually adapt to a rapidly changing environment, including the workforce, right? Critical thinking, problem solving, communication, collaboration, right? What an accountant, what your finance people on your campus need to know in order to be able to serve you effectively and create an environment where you and students are thriving as faculty members and administrators is much broader than just the accounting principles, right? So this idea of compartmentalized disciplines is really designed to serve the industrial economy, not our knowledge and information economy, right? And the idea here is that we have to have really well-rounded adaptive thinkers and individuals who can think critically, solve problems creatively, and thrive in a dynamic environment. For me, this was music to my ears. This is music to my ears as we continue to see surface in these conversations, the tension between, are we just a machine for the workforce, when we also have to, we feel our charge is to support the development of engaged, civically minded, right, citizens of our nation, right? So this tension has to come together in this knowledge and information age because it is one and the same at this point going forward. Okay, so the way this is showing up in the economy, right, and in the workforce is that the ways in which we have historically thought about the workforce need to evolve. And if we haven't been navigating the workforce recently, right, because we've been spending our time in the education sector, there is a question mark around what does it really look like to be a creator, right, and to be an influencer, to write prompts for generative AI and or to work on AI, et cetera. And so what you see on the screen here is just a sampling of the ways in which navigating careers is really about the overlap and the agency that individuals need to be able to have to navigate a wider set of options for their career trajectories. So we are often familiar and embrace the ladder or lattice when we're getting feisty, and we're like, we're gonna shake things up, and we talk about lattices. However, the idea of agency within your career is often reserved for those who have the most access and education and network. And yet individuals right out of high school have a lot more agency if they choose to lean into it, right? And so how are we supporting these other types of employment trajectories, career trajectories, roles, and combinations of roles? There is always the question of equitable compensation and stability and who has access to these pieces. So I never want to lose sight of the equity piece. But this is why I think that it's so critical that our education institutions are really thinking about how are we designed to support students' both awareness and knowledge of this employment trajectory, these employment trajectory changes, while also supporting their empowerment to navigate them in ways that maximize, right, their family and generational prosperity, right? So we're seeing a lot of different ways in which individuals are navigating the workforce. I want to come back to our educational framework and this concept of built for purpose, right? I'm going to be talking about that all throughout this presentation because, as I think I probably alluded to, but didn't name specifically at the beginning, we are no longer built for the right purpose as a higher education system, right? So let me just say that out loud. We are no longer built for the right purpose. And we continue to tweak without really recognizing that we, I don't know, we are living in an igloo during a time of global warming, right? So we have to actually shift because it is melting around us. So the idea relative to workforce, right, is that our educational framework for the industrial economy was, again, really preparing individuals for these specific roles in the workforce. And we have been talking about this, at least on the workforce side, for at least a decade, I would say two. I know I don't look that old, but at least 2 decades that I've been around, we have been talking about the changing workforce and how individuals are going to navigate between 17 and 35 different jobs or careers or industry sectors. And yet we still are preparing individuals for specific roles in the workforce. All right. I would love to hear in the chat. Have folks heard this? People are going to have 17 different jobs over a lifetime. They're going to navigate multiple industry sectors. Throw it in the chat. Would love to hear. Am I assuming that people have that information and they don't? Would love to know. The second, but what we are supposed to be or need to be preparing students for, what our purpose needs to be is preparing individuals to navigate complex, evolving landscapes, right? Because as generative AI comes online, occupations are going to change. Occupations are obsolete, new occupations. I am loving that. Thank you for those responding in the chat. We have been talking about this on the workforce side for multiple decades. It is happening all over. Employment trajectory is really the data we should be looking at and really thinking about how we're disrupting employment trajectory for the positive side, right? To improve employment trajectories. So there's less laterals and more upward momentum. But because we are focused on specific occupations or roles or disciplines, right, we are not really effectively preparing individuals to navigate a complex evolving landscape. And it may be 17 jobs and 4 to 5, 4 to 5 industries, but it's increasing. And what we haven't talked about is the gig economy, where people are navigating lots of different employment trajectories. And so our schema, right, what we think we are trying to do when we say students graduate really needs a hard look. I am not proposing hard solutions because we are all in this space of what does this look like as we continue to move forward, and how do we scaffold that evolution, but how do we do it much more quickly than we have been? So there is really this need to adapt our framework and our what we are built for. I want to introduce a term that I am currently in love with, and that I'm not sure what that says about me, but this is getting to the N of one. Right. I heard a presenter talk about this and really talk about it relative to our education competition, our private for-profit education competition. That what folks are really trying to figure out is how to get to an N of one in terms of the student experience. So think about your Netflix account, right? Or your Prime account, and how it is feeding you exactly what you want. You are able to navigate. It connects to your PayPal, whatever it might be. It is an experience that is custom to you, feels custom to you, and they are able to serve en masse in a way that is customized. I'm going to say that again. They're able to serve millions of people in a way that feels unique to every individual who is engaging in that platform, right? That's what I mean by an N of one. And right now, we struggle with that. We are not anywhere near that within higher education because we got to serve the masses, and we are thinking that we are serving the masses. I'm going to talk about scale in a minute, but I want to hold on to this concept of N of one. I was fascinated when I heard it, and it turned on some light bulbs for myself and for some of the folks in the room. Again, hopefully many folks have seen this, some version of this visual. This is an updated visual. Heather McGowan, amazing education futurist, her and her team, colleagues, have prepared this visual. And again, another one of my favorites. I love the evolution, and the way I want to talk about this, if you've heard me talk before, you've heard me talk about we need to become that learn box. It's now black, the black learn box, as opposed to the black educate box at top, where we're sort of cramming it all in the front end and sending people out into the workforce. Again, that's the industrial model, right? Where up on your left-hand side, right, you see the black educate box. And often we think our job right now, the trajectory is that we are cramming it all in, getting you all to be an expert, and then sending you off to work, and then you're out there, and then you retire, right? This curve, right, in that top left-hand side. I want to take you down to the bottom to the new emerging model. And what you see, right, we in community colleges know that top left has been a fallacy all along, right? Many of our students are not coming to us right out of high school, right, at 18 years old. Many are, but that is the traditional, non-traditional is a myth, right? And what we're really seeing instead, and what we will continue to see more of, is what you see at the bottom emerging model, which is individuals navigating, right, education and workforce while they are enrolled in school, etc. And what you also see is that this is what is projected over a lifetime. Now, this is the norm that is both right now and projected to continue. And we are still constructed like that red educate box at the top left, not like that, or excuse me, the black educate, it used to be red, the black learn box at the bottom. What I love that they've introduced, because I think this matters for built for purpose conversations, right? Which is, you'll see this dotted white line, right? This fluid line, that's an individual's trajectory, if you will. On the top right, the faulty logic model that we have embraced for decades, right? Is that we are going to educate those who come to us. We're going to send them out. And then 20 years later, whenever they need to reskill or upskill, they're going to come back to us and take this 3-month retraining. And then we're going to push them back out and never to see them again. Thank you. It's been real, right? Good luck, God bless, right? That is, if we look at the emerging model, right, down below, the top model does not work for individuals who have to navigate this and actually are penalized if they're not participating in this, because you're losing opportunity costs, right? You're losing income and you're losing networks, professional networks. You are not leveraging your professional networks to both enhance your learning and comprehension and skills and abilities, but also your opportunities for employment, your employment trajectory, right? Where you go next, right? And we have tried to solve this in higher ed because we still think our built for purpose are those top 2 models, right? We have tried to solve this by, we'll create a few internships and we'll try to build business and industry partnerships, as opposed to centering the student, right? Individual who is navigating that white dotted line, right? The thing that I want folks to take away from this is that we really have to shift our whole construct of what we think we're trying to do and what our role is as we are supporting individuals with scaffolding their knowledge, competency, and also being able to position them for economic prosperity within the workforce. I also want to note, as I get ready to transition to the next slide, that white dotted line looks different for everyone. You know this, right? But I think this goes back to the N of 1. It is different for everyone. What I come with is different than what I experience while I'm with you. And it's happening right now. We just don't account for it. And this, I think, is part of the equity issue. We talk about this in the workforce side, that if I am a child of, if I'm a oldest child who has to watch siblings, because that is the expectation from my family, I don't build a resume in the ways that an individual who does not, a child who does not have that responsibility is able to get a part-time job or do different things in order to build a resume. And yet, the assets that I bring, the time management, the conflict resolution, all of the skills that I am having to develop, right, ad hoc on my own as a babysitter for my siblings, is not being transcripted, it's not being enhanced and augmented, and it's not getting credit on a resume when I am trying to enter the workforce. And so when we think about both equity and an assets-based approach to the individuals who show up at our institution or who we are aiming to serve, our old model really limits all that they bring to the conversation and to their learning experience, right? So I want to hold on to that as we continue to go forward. And as we think about this N of 1, with hundreds and thousands and millions of white dotted line trajectories, including our own, right? How do we evolve in a way that it creates that unique experience, or that perceived unique experience for individuals, but also accounts for all of the information, knowledge, experiences that they bring to the table as part of their learning trajectory? And I want to, I'm not going to say this as artfully as I wish I would. We're still playing with this language and trying to find the right words for it. But you all know, right, that learning, right, our ability to understand and comprehend is often accelerated by what we are able to connect it to, that intellectual schema that we are able to connect it to in order to scaffold our comprehension of complex concepts, right? We in education are not leveraging that as effectively as we could be, right? given that we try to compartmentalize and we're not making those interdisciplinary connections or those real life connections. And that sounds very generic, and I'm sure many of us do it better than others, but it is a challenge because it's not what we by default are designed to do. We don't see that as what we are designed to do, right? You have to memorize this theory and then demonstrate that you memorize the theory. And I'm really oversimplifying because I know we have amazing faculty on this, so bear with me here. But as a construct, faculty members are required to, right? I'll put that in, are required to do what I just described, right? It's not for lack of want or desire. It is, these are the expectations, these are the norms. This is our design within higher education. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. And then if I'll hope my friends who are running this, please let me know if I am running long. I could talk about this forever and I apologize. And again, folks in the chat, what am I getting super wrong? What is resonating? What is a WTF, an OMG? Would love to hear it. So I want to take you on a journey of one of our ends or a couple of our ends, right? That white dotted line. So imagine this is the map of the skills, the universe of skills or competencies that people can accumulate for sake of discussion. We wrestled with this. I kept saying, you know, the little squares, and they're like, it's a honeycomb because you're filling all of it. So we're, again, still playing with this. Again, appreciate all the feedback, both critical and positive. What's resonating, what's not. And so we can imagine, again, just a quick primer, that these two that are filled in black, they're different skills. They're farther away from each other on this universe of skills map, and they're a little bit farther away. And then these, they're not so different. They're more adjacent, they're more complementary, they can build upon one another, and that's represented by being a little bit closer together for sake of discussion. So let's say in this, Jennifer is a mechanical engineer. Then this is Jennifer's skill profile, if you will, right? The black, the honeycombs filled in black really demonstrate mastery of the content or the skill, the competence, and the ones shaded in gray is where she's developing and where it's growing, right? Where her skill set is growing. And what I want you to pay attention to, I'm hoping you all can see my mouse, and I apologize if this gets confusing, throw it in the chat. I will slow down and come back and or not do this again. So pay attention to this bubble right here on the on your right-hand side, right? The top three are black, the lower three in the middle, the lower two in the middle are gray, and this one's sort of clear. And this will help us keep an eye on the changes that I'm about to show you, okay? So let's say this is Claire, and Claire is a chemist. And what you'll note here is that there are some overlapping skills in this flower, honeycomb flower over here, where again, also some darkly shaded, the top three are darkly shaded, and some gray down here, again, very similar to what we saw with the mechanical engineer, again, for sake of discussion. And then we see all of these ones down here as shaded in black, mastery. You also see a few over here to account for some of the other things. Maybe she has a garden, right? And she's gardening, and that'll make sense in a minute. And so we have some other competencies over here that she has mastered. This might be an entry-level app developer. Again, lots of gray, a few mastered, but also you can tell here that the direction they can go, chemist or mechanical engineer, again, for sake of discussion, if they're, again, chemists and mechanical engineers, if we need to use different occupation examples, please let us know. But what you'll see is that how do we direct it? How do we advise, right? They could go in either direction, and they can continue to accumulate because their starting development competency really blends across too. We tend to think about this right now as courses. You've completed courses, right? Towards a degree. And this is not that. Right? These are not representing courses. These are representing the competencies and skills that individuals have mastered or have begun to develop. And that development trajectory can be very lengthy. And I think the important thing here is that people do not lose their skills and competencies. They take them with them to their next place, wherever that is, whether it's education or employment or relationships, parenting, whatever it might be. right? And so how do we honor, as an education institution, how do we build a purpose that honors and helps individuals aggregate all of the assets, learning, knowledge, awareness, all of it that they have been able to build? I want to pause here and note, folks would love to see in the chat or raise hands, how many folks are familiar with the Skills First movement? I see a few heads nodding, right? I see a few heads. Okay, so there is a huge movement that has been going on for, I don't know, at least 5 years. It's, you know, they rinse and repeat and cycle through. But the Skills First movement is this movement to no longer require bachelor's degrees for jobs. Right here in California, our governor, a lot of different governments are issuing their edicts that they are no longer requiring degrees, bachelor's degrees, for particular occupations, right, or particular jobs. And this, I think we can say, well, it's not going to hit us, and yet individuals now have access, which means that their reliance on education to obtain access is diminishing. And this is also contributing to many of the factors, right, that are informing and or contributing to our enrollment decline, right, if you will. So I just want to name that the Skills First movement is really gaining momentum, particularly in this administration, but it's been going on for years, right? What we know from an equity perspective is that when we create parallel paths, those who have education and those who do not, the ones most vulnerable in the workforce when the economy tanks, right, when the recessions hit, are those who do not have the degrees, right, or do not have the education. So the vulnerability that we are placing students in, individuals in, right, when we go the skills first trajectory is something that is very top of mind for me. It may be wonderful. I don't have a crystal ball, but my magic 8 ball says, no, it's not going to be good, right? But we'll see. So I want to emphasize that when we're talking about skills and competencies here, we are not talking about courses, right? This is not an equivalent to courses. Courses can be a vehicle for individuals filling in their honeycombs, right? But this is not the equivalent. This is about the individual acquisition and map of all the things that all the skills and competencies they are bringing to the table. Okay. So we saw the front-end developer emerging entry level. Here we see a very experienced, and it overlaps again with our chemist and mechanical engineer, and we see them shaded in black. But let's also then look at something a little bit outside of this, right? And so again, that farmer up in your left-hand corner is doing farming, has obtained mastery there, maybe went to an agriculture program, got a degree in agriculture, and is also an amateur private investigator, right? They're obsessed with Dateline, and they are online and looking at different pieces, and they've done some work in app development in order to understand how to navigate that, right? So you see this blending and different areas of shaded gray, shaded black. We're going to spend a little bit of time here on Tom. I'm going to say Tom is a chef, right, who spends every weekend tinkering with drones, right? Again, N of 1. This is just a handful of individuals, and the variation, and this concept of people's interests, hobbies, etc., right? These could be, Tom could have learned all his chef work on Rachel Ray, if you're old enough to remember Rachel Ray, or whatever the cooking channels are these days, and had gone to school for drones, right? Or vice versa. So, and you'll see the different shades of gray and black, etc. But let's say Tom went to school. He went to one of our culinary programs and obtained a certificate or degree and is a professional chef and learned that in school. And all these others were learned elsewhere, right? And you'll see all the different, TikTok, YouTube, etc., right? All the different vehicles where acquisition of information and applied experiential learning on my own time through my own resources in my own space, perhaps, is happening, right? And from other folks, I love this, right? The guy at the hobby store, someone at the hobby store who goes by the nickname Pilot, right? It happens, right? And they're learning from those individuals. Where we land and why this matters for our education institution is that some are considered valid. Those culinary skills that are transcripted are considered valid or validated, right? They are externally validated. And those that are over there with the pilot are considered invalid or not externally validated, right? Because they are not transcripted. However, what I would point to is that they are validated in the I got my drone up and it operates, right? So there is a validation and an example of the proficiency of the work, right? And the skill set, but it is not transcripted or validated in the ways that we currently think about it. We might default here to, PLA, right? Prior learning assessments, right? We just need to have more prior learning assessments. Maybe. But also at the scale that we're talking about, we really need to think about how, if that's the direction we go, how that is accessible at scale, not necessarily related to courses, right? Because the course construct means that you have to hit all of those before you are able to receive a transcripted validated, right? Or transcripted validation. And what we're talking about here again is not related to courses, right? And then what we also have to think about is that this universe of skills is perpetually expanding. It is, it's possibly contracting, right? I use the example of Lotus 1, 2, 3. Again, if you remember Lotus 1, 2, 3, you're my people. That is no longer a skill set that is really relevant, right? However, it is transferable because I am somewhat proficient at Excel, right? Or Google Sheets. And for those who don't know, Lotus 1, 2, 3 was the precursor, right? If you will. So while Lotus 1, 2, 3 specifically may not be the required skill set, it is, right? We as individuals take those skills and knowledge and abilities with us and can apply them in different concepts. Right. In the expansion, we can also think, right, writing AI prompts was not a skill that was required previously. Right? It wouldn't have been on the honeycomb necessarily, at least for the majority of us. If you are a developer of AI, you may have been working on that for decades and you already have mastery. However, as a consultant, I might say that my ability to write discussion prompts, right, and engage individuals in conversations is a very transferable skill to writing AI prompts. It may not be, right? So what does that look like? How do we build on what we already know in order to continue to populate? This is why PLA is a necessary but insufficient response, because I may have applicable information, knowledge, skills that really just put me in the gray area. And then I need to build on that to make sure that I am getting into the black mastery, right, of the honeycomb. So they will expand, they will contract, they will change, but our individual competence is not what changes, right? It is the way this honeycomb gets constructed, if you will. And really, getting to an N of 1 requires acknowledging that the universe of skills, right, what we've been looking at is really just a zoom in, and it is very complex and comprehensive and large, right? And so we have to be thinking about what we do differently. Okay. I'm seeing in the chat, yes, whole person concept, right? Centering the learners means centering them and their experience and all that they bring to the table. And we continue to operate from our institutional constraints, because that's what we were built for originally, right? We were built to do a job for the workforce as opposed to a job for the people who have to navigate a complex society. And again, I say this knowing that there is no easy answer, but I think there is an importance in being aware of what is the work that we have in front of us to do. So what I will also say is that getting to this N of 1, right? We really need to focus on personalized insights. In higher ed, we've looked at predictive analytics and big data, and we have to do both. We have to do that. And we have to start thinking about what does personalized data look like, and how are we using it to create this very customized experience for individuals, right? What's that integration, right? Because we need to understand who our person is holistically, right? And all of them effectively. Adaptability acknowledges individual variability and focuses on adapting methods to suit the individual's unique preferences or circumstances. What is the right content? We might think about it as courses. I would encourage us not to, but what is the right content to push to that oldest sibling who is watching children, right, during the day, right? What is going to help them actually build competence in particular areas related to the things they are already having to do, right? That is a customized experience, and I am getting just-in-time information that helps me change and or adapt, scaffold my understanding, competence, awareness, knowledge, right? Practical application, things like personalized learning paths. So think about Alex for those that, that may be familiar with that math platform where it's, or even the, I think the SAT and whatnot, where it's changing the question based on how you responded, how you performed on the last question in order to make sure that you are getting reinforced support if you got the last question wrong, right? Or moving you forward. So it's very customized, right, in that personalized learning path. Recommendation systems, right? You like Downton Abbey, you might like Pride and Prejudice, right? Or whatever it might be. Think again, that Netflix kind of model. Although we have to think about what does that look like in higher education. And then customizable workflows, right? So, which I think that is where we default in this. We want the student success platform that allows us to automate scheduling. We haven't really asked the question, do we need all those appointments? Or is it because we are built for a different purpose that requires, again, compliance, right, et cetera? Question mark, right? And I say all of this lovingly. Okay, I'm going to keep moving because I don't want to run out of time and have a little bit more. There was something else I was going to say here that I am forgetting, but I'll remember later. Okay, so let's talk about building with purpose. Because I don't ever want to leave folks with just this feeling of despair, right? And or this is too big. There, what do we do? It's too big. It is too big. And also we have to just start putting one step in front of the other. And part of that is even just an awareness of what situation we're currently in. Oh, I remember what I was going to say for the last slide. I'm going to say it here. Yesterday, I am on TikTok. I love TikTok. It has helped me have a line of sight to different conversations and cultural moments that are happening amongst younger generations and different populations. So just the level of awareness and learning for me personally, my algorithm is algorithming, as they say. But what I saw yesterday, what I woke up and took a few, or last night, I took a few looks. There is a teacher, a faculty member, who posted videos for her class on African American Studies, right? Dr. Barlow, I want to say. And the number of individuals from all walks of life, from all age demographics, from all occupations, showed up in the comments. She got 100,000 followers instantly. I'm taking this, like, oh, good, I'm enrolled in TikTok University, right? And so she had to shut down her account, like make it private, because she's a real professor teaching a real class, and this was for her 30 students. But then you saw, I saw a dozen at least of other professors who were like, great, you are now enrolled in Finance 101, and we're going to talk about how to manage your finances and what the new tax laws mean and what a tariff is, or whatever it might be. People are showing up saying, here is my content, here is my expertise. I'm an adjunct faculty member here. I'm a faculty member there. Here, let me teach you. And people are like, I'm now enrolled in comms and PR and finance and American studies. It is happening. It is happening. I'm like, oh, this is what we've been talking about. And it is happening. Is it real? Is it parity? Is it effective? Are they going to be able to document whether or not learning happened? Question mark. Are people going to learn? Yeah. Are they going to learn the true information? Question mark, right? Or what people are being fed, is it validated? Question mark. Are we can we control that? No. right? So this is what we have to be wrestling with, because if we don't engage with it, it's going to happen whether we can control it or not. And how are we showing up in that is a big, big question for me. And what does this mean for faculty, right? Question mark. And our education workforce, right? As we really think about design for purpose. So just naming that. I know you can't download TikTok on the App Store, so if you aren't there, it's okay. But just it's why. And I just saw this morning that faculty member unprivated her account, invited everyone in, is giving reading lists, is talking about the quizzes, is sharing her knowledge, right, with individuals. She's also probably now part of the creator culture or creator program where she gets paid for followers and views. It is a different financing construct as well. Question mark, right? I don't know exactly how that works, but and or whether or not you have to opt in or not, but it is a different vehicle for sharing information than what we have historically had constructed for us. So I feel like it's yes, I feel like all of the things. So just want to name that hot off the presses as of yesterday. So my first thought, well, none of this may seem optional. It is always voluntary to, participate. So I love this visual. All of my slides have links to the resources. I am borrowing a lot and trying to make sure I give credit. But yeah, we in education often feel like it's happening, but it's not really going to happen to us, or that's a thing out there, and we'll wait and see. And I feel like we are at a moment, right? We have been at a moment, right? There was also a young lady on TikTok yesterday who gave the analogy of movies. Characters in movies don't know what genre of movie they are in, right? And they don't know where they are in the movie. So when the individual goes downstairs to the basement to check a noise and you're like, why? They don't know they're in a horror movie, right? They think they're going downstairs to check a noise. You know that they're in a horror movie. And so you know what's coming because you know what the genre is and where you are in the movie, right? And I feel like that was such a beautiful analogy, which again, I learned so much, right, from others in terms of where are we at and what movie are we in, right? What movie are we in right now in higher education? And where are we at in that storyline? And we are not at the beginning. We are not at the beginning. ASU, all the privates, right? Online education, all of the things, right? We are not at the beginning. The eroding trust in higher education that has been growing, we are not at the beginning of our story. But we can wait. That is an option. For those who, again, have seen me talk before, I really make it a point to hit on reform versus transform. We have been focused in higher ed on the reform side, and we tinker as opposed to really transforming. I point to DevEd as the one big example that higher ed has advanced, which is when you are making changes to finances, job descriptions, full departments, et cetera. Think about your assessment centers that used to exist or perhaps really shifted. It is a thorough and dramatic change in the form, appearance, and character of. The title of this Built for Purpose slide, though, is From Scale to Trust, and I promised that we'd talk a little bit about scale. Once upon a time, the organization I was at, our teams hosted a convening and had a speaker who came and talked about a number of topics, but the thing that stuck with me the most is that I want to say it was 2017, 2018. He talked about how, and he was from, I want to say BlackRock, right? It was a very industry centric. What he said though was that the economy was shifting from a scale as a growth strategy to trust, right? To a values based growth strategy. And he said, we are moving from scale to trust. It is no longer scale. It is all about trust. And we have seen that in the ways in which consumers are becoming much more aware, boycotting and or supporting, depending on where the values align, right? That is an element of a values-based based growth strategy, because then you see companies responding. We're going to hold our DEI, right? We're not abandoning, or we're going to tone it down, whatever it might be, right? It is no longer about scale. And if we in education continue to think about the work we are doing as trying to get to scale, we are not getting to an N of 1, right? We are trying to uniformly, efficiently offer what we have, maybe with some slight variation. We're going to do a little differentiation, but we're not getting to an N of 1, and we are not focused on rebuilding trust and value propositions. Right. And I don't just mean value propositions in terms of ROI, but in terms of aligning with consumers' values, which is where the industry, where the economy was and employers and industry were in 2018. This is again where I say, like, we are not at the beginning of our journey and the story here, right? We are much farther along. So really thinking about what does transformation look like in an age where trust is the scale vehicle, right? Is the growth vehicle. I am a huge fan of agile learning. As I learn more, I may learn to not love this, but again, we are growing and learning. You all know much more about this than I do, but really thinking about how are we integrating agile learning into our practices? How is it showing up in our campus policies, in our department policies and practices? Really focused on equipping learners with the skills to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. How is that showing up in your curriculum, in your courses, in your conversations around professional development, et cetera? It emphasizes adaptability, collaboration, and rapid iteration. How is it showing up in your daily lesson plans, your course experiences, activities, et cetera? And the structure is really about short learning cycles with frequent feedback loops. Again, you all are probably really familiar with this, but this is, does it matter what topic when I have access to all the topics at my fingertips on my phone, right? Or is it more important that I can, or is it equally important that I can actually integrate new information and discern, like check sources, right? And discern, is this information valid? Where is it coming from? What are the two sides of this argument? Can I engage in this in order to integrate this information effectively, right? And then I also want to acknowledge the time we are in, how easy it is for us to feel very uncertain on multiple levels, right? The economy, the government, the different wars, and also our own courses, our declining enrollment, perhaps, our state budget, right? Things even more closer to home. And so I'm hoping many of you are familiar with this term VUCA, but if not, I wanted to introduce it because I feel like if we have language, we can talk about it and talk through it and move to the other side. But if we don't have language for it, it continues to swirl for us. For those who may not be aware, VUCA typically stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, that top row. And we often will hear, like, we're living in a time of VUCA, right? Ooh, chaos, fear, all of the things, right? Because it is about it being disrupted, rapid changes, uncertainty, we don't know what's coming, a lot of ambiguity, a lot of we don't know, and so we're waiting. Many folks, all across my TikTok page, because that's the side that I'm on, are K-12 teachers talking about potential ICE raids and different things. And so there is a lot of fear and ambiguity because they don't know what's going to happen, right? But so how do we individually, collectively, really begin to think about and lean into things like that bottom row and really shift VUCA to a place where we can be proactive and sort of stabilize what is a very volatile environment at the moment. Wildfires, right? Again, it's not just the government, it is across the board, all the things that are happening. So vision and an unrelenting focus or purpose. So even if most of us don't have control of our institutions, but within your departments, within your course, for your students, right? All of these pieces, how are we really leaning into these elements? Understanding, clarity, and agility. And this last one, the A, is really what I would like to focus on as we wrap up this conversation, because the being flexible is core to being able to manage the rest of this. I want to leave you with this concept of the transformation coin. And this, again, all of this content has been generated by multiple conversations with different leaders and amazing practitioners. And in that, one of the questions that surfaced in those conversations, one of the questions that surfaced was this question of ambiguity. How do you hire individuals? Like, how do you know if individuals can navigate ambiguity? How do we identify those who have this skill set? And we were sort of talking through this, and what surfaced was this two-sided coin, the transformation coin, if you will. On one side is ambiguity and all the unknowns, and on the other side is creation. The way that individuals show up and navigate ambiguity is by creating. And there are two ways in which this can play out, probably many more, but two for this conversation. And in that first line of definition description, what you see is ambiguity really centered as uncertainty. And underneath that is the fear, the anxiety, sort of the tone of it is that the worry, right? We don't know. And so then the creation side becomes about creating order, right? Clarity, order, expression. So think about the ways in which some institutions or systems or even individuals have approached AI. I don't know. It's unfamiliar. I worry that it's going to do bad things, right? Whatever those bad things are. And so I am trying to confine, constrain, control, and provide clarity about where it is acceptable and where it is not. We gotta set boundaries around this, right? And sort of guardrails, right? However, if we look at that second line, it's really positioning ambiguity as fostering exploration, right? It is unknown. It's not uncertain. It is unknown. So we have to be curious. We have to explore. We have to seek to understand and learn. We have to enter a learner's mindset here. And the creation focus then becomes needing to navigate it, not needing to control it, but needing to we need to navigate AI as an example. We don't need to control it. We need to navigate it, and we need to be able to do that in a way that helps find solutions and expresses options and opportunities in open-ended ways. And so really thinking about ambiguity and the time that we are in, not as the sky is falling, right, perhaps, but much more as an opportunity for us to unlearn and learn anew. And I think central to this effort is going to be assessing learning. How do we know if learning happened? Because that really is our purpose at this time, right? Going forward in a knowledge economy, our purpose is understanding and supporting and transcripting, validating learning, right? All of the things. So I will leave you with this quote. I love a quote for those who know me. You won't know the path until you're on it. And unfortunately or fortunately, whether we wanted to be here or not, we are on it. So thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I think I might have used all of my time, so I apologize if I no longer have time for questions.
Bring my camera back. That is perfectly fine. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Jarek, how are we doing on time? Do we want to do a few questions or?
I think we were going to maybe give people a 5-minute quick potty bio break.
Yeah, that works too. So thank you so much, Marty. Should we maybe come back at 10 even?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Take a few minutes. I'm sure a few of us will hang out here if you want to hang out as well, and continue engaging in the chat. Otherwise, get up, stretch, refill your coffee cup, and we'll see you in a little bit.
So Marty, this is just very, very fiery speech. You don't know, but we've been texting each other as we were talking. This is just absolutely fantastic. We've been talking about this, and I think if I were to reflect on your presentation, you are putting those visuals and putting the concepts, the descriptors that you're using in such clear and illustrative way at the same time, so succinctly. I'm speechless. I mean, I just can't find ways to describe it. I mean, I had more questions that I could even. I mean, it was just my brain, I guess, didn't compute as fast as you were speaking. It's just truly amazing, starting with the student agency and then AI and the importance of skills. And when you touched upon this TikTok, I put it in the chat room. You think about it, that okay, fine. So when we have trust and we have the skill on the part of faculty, world is not the limit anymore. I mean, this is like, we can do anything. We really can. And I'm just thinking, okay, what about international borders? What about our funding formula? What about tuition? What about, all these things that fill out our days, and we get paid to understand, to figure out, okay, things that are being, let's just say, snatched from under our feet as we try to linger. And it's I'm just absolutely stunned. So I'm just looking forward to working with you more on these topics, and we hope to have you. I suppose each one of those slides could be a Friday SLO talk. It's just a conversation that can probably engage a lot of people at so many different levels. You're absolutely right. We as instructors, as faculty leaders, our systems, when we think of courses, we put everything in our pigeonholes, thinking that this is the best way we can do. We never talk about history of psychology, or geography of psychology, or chemistry of psychology, right? And then you think of I don't know, math. Why can't we talk about English language arts and math at the same time in the same sentence? We just can't. And again, if we can't, well, students are doing it for us. And again, the examples that you brought up, just such fantastic illustrations. I'm just besides myself. So thank you so much. I'll just leave it at that, because again, my brain is just spinning around all those thoughts. So thank you. I just cannot thank you enough. I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much. This is really, all the feedback is super helpful. Critical feedback, so it gets clearer, is also really helpful in the chat. Thank you. I do want to say, I am a practitioner at heart, so rolling up my sleeves and getting into the work is a joy. And I know how hard this really is for all of us in terms of implementation. And so Sova and with our network of national partners, funders, whomever it might be, we would love to be in community with you doing this work and setting the, introducing what's possible, right, for public higher education. So thank you so much, everyone.
That's right. We'll be here. Thank you again.
If I can just add, it's also very comforting to hear your perspectives and know that that's the brain that was helping shape so much of what happens in our system. So it's very, sometimes we're so far removed from the chancellor's office and what, has happened and future plan. And so it's just, it's heartening to hear, like, oh, these are some of the thought process that we're going into. Like, that's encouraging to hear it firsthand from someone who was in the mix of it. So thank you for that. Thank you for what you've done for our system.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate you all. Appreciate everyone's super hard work, and appreciate you being here on a Saturday. So thank you so much.
You too.
Today, I have the pleasure and privilege of introducing our next presenters, Matthew Morin and Trelisa Glazatov, who bring innovative perspectives to competency-based education and credentialing. Matthew serves as the Dean of Academic Affairs at Santa Ana College, where he oversees initiatives that enhance academic programs and support student success. Joining him is Trelisa Glazatov, a credentialing systems designer from Chaffey College, whose expertise lies in creating pathways for students to showcase their skills through cutting-edge digital credentials. Today, they'll be presenting on Back to Basics, Rethinking the Purpose of Assessment for Students and Faculty. Their session highlights Chaffey College's transformative approach to linking Canvas outcomes and credentials at the institution level using a custom-built outcomes credential alignment tool. This innovative system has enabled the college to scale competency-based education, assess employability skills across the curriculum, and award over 50,000 digital micro-credentials to more than 11,000 students. Their presentation will provide valuable insights into the integration of technology, authentic assessment, and potential AI applications in higher education, including the exciting possibility of credential pathways in ethical AI use. Please join me in welcoming Matthew and Trelisa.
Thank you, Michelle. Matt, did you want to say anything while I bring up the slides?
Sure. Just that if any of you attended our presentation yesterday, we will put the link in the chat to those slides. They'll show a lot of visuals of what Michelle just described, the systems that were just described. And today's session will be more of a working session that will also activate a lot of the ideas that Marty Alvarado just put out to the group, and so I'll let Trey set the stage.
All right, thank you. And good Saturday morning. I hope everybody's on the second cup of coffee if you're a coffee drinker, or maybe the third cup of tea if you're a tea drinker. But thank you for having us talk with you today. As Matt mentioned, we really want to have this as a working session. Dr. Alvarado really teed us up today and really trying to facilitate a commitment to that call of action points that she talked about. But I did want to, because we're going to work collaboratively today, I want to set some agreements to move us forward and highlight some thoughts I think that can center us in our conversation this morning. The first one is really to work collectively on prioritizing getting back to basics. And we'll talk about what back to basics may mean in this context of our work. Marty mentioned this before, but I also had it as well, as reframing our work as practitioners and leaders in this space of outcomes and assessment. And then really leaning into our work to innovate and change. I know there were some mentions in the chat of we really need to rethink how we're navigating and working within our systems. And we need to think about something new, because as we know, what is currently built is not working as we expect. So how may that look for us? What we're hoping that you leave with in the next hour, some increase in communal intelligence. We know that this is collective work, and although Matt and I will share our experience over the last several years, we are going to be tapping into yours as well, because everybody that's in this room, we know, will offer insights and gifts and thoughts to a better solution. And so we really want to tap into that intelligence. And we want to move forward. We want to accelerate this work. So we're going to hopefully be empowered to act, not only with some tangible goals in the next 6 months, but the 12 months. And at the end of the presentation, we'll talk about how do we stay in community and get some of those lofty goals, or maybe some tangible goals, accelerated over the next 6 to 12 months. So Matt and I are storytellers, and we're going to be using that storytelling element throughout our presentation. And we know that storytelling is in a lot of cultures, and it's very important because it serves a lot of different purposes, right? It serves to preserve the history and traditions of a community, right? Of knowing what happened before and how we use those lessons learned to move forward. It also explains what's going on, what's working and what's not, and how do we adapt and pivot. It magnifies what's important, and it also helps us to celebrate and to entertain in some respects. And so we're going to be using that storytelling element to share some of the lessons learned over the last several years, and we're going to also invite you to share your stories as well. So we have some principles and some priorities. We're going to go over the principles first. If you know me, and I consider you all friends now because we're on Zoom now. I love Proverbs. I think they pack a punch. And so you're going to see a lot of Proverbs through this presentation, and we will explain what they mean as from our perspective. but hopefully help you retain some of those thoughts and wonderings that you may have, as you have heard all of these speakers this morning. So I'm going to start off with the first one. I consider these principles of practice really the heart work of what we do, because a lot of the how and why is like the people stuff, right? It's the heart work, it's our values, it's why we do this work and why we stay in the fight, if you will. So the first one is teamwork without coordination leads to confusion. And I know that may resonate with you, so you can put an amen, an ashe, a yep, a yes sirree, Bob in the chat if it resonates with you. But teamwork without coordination leads to confusion. We know that in this work, sometimes it feels isolated, but we often do need others. And so what this proverb really speaks to from our experiences is about a core team. And let me add some context. Michelle explained, introduced us and share that at Chaffey College, we were able to have this skill forward language integrated into our systems and outcomes and translate that into skill bundles and credentials for students. And now we're able to tell different data stories and whatnot. But it took a core team to do that. And a core team, let me nuance this a little bit. I'm not just talking about roles in the organization. I'm talking about people who are going to stay in it with you. So at the very beginning of this journey, which was 4+ years ago, that core team was 2 people. It was me and Matt in an office and a whiteboard. And we have been the common thread over the last several years. But part of finding who else could be part of our team required a high degree of organizational awareness, because we didn't need roles and positions per se. We needed people who understood the long game, who were able to use their influence, whether it was from their position or work in the college, or maybe just because people liked them and would listen to them. We needed to be able to have people be able to outwardly express what this work was and inwardly be thought partners with us to help move it forward. So the core team over the last 4 years have flexed. It included faculty, it included staff and technologists, it included administrators who were our champions. But the common thread was me and Matt needed to move it forward. So that meant sometimes the work was private, behind the scenes. It was just me and Matt in a dark room going, let's just keep this working. And often, and lately it's been public facing, where everybody has eyes on it. And so you're going to have to find who's going to be those allies and co-conspirators with you that's going to be in for the long haul. Knowing that people transition, promotion, or to other spaces on campus, who are those people? And I'm going to just shout out the folks that have helped us over the journey as well. Shannon Jensen was one of the first core team members, Angela Burkerick, Adriana Ars, Laura Picklesheimer. Like, all of these folks have been coming in and out, being thought partners with us, and being able to keep the work moving forward as me and Matt have been keeping pace over the last 4 years. So now I'm going to turn it over to Matt so we can hear his voice and explain to us. You can either, tap in on this first one, or you can go to this next proverb and share what that meant for you in this experience.
Yeah, so the next proverb is, let not what you cannot do tear you from what you can do. And I think this really does speak to a lot of the tone that Marty Alvarado was getting to. She was setting some really lofty horizons for us. And a lot of what she was talking about, I think, for the practitioners in the room who are thinking about their work and outcomes assessment, it might seem almost kind of science fiction-y, like out of reach for the daily work of outcomes assessment. But at Chaffey, we really kind of first started with what is it that that we want to see for students when we think about measuring learning in a formal outcomes assessment framework. And of course, that means we need to meet our accreditation requirement, but that should just be the floor. That shouldn't be the bar that we're reaching for, is meeting our accreditation requirement. And so when we thought about meaningful measurement of student work, what we really wanted to see was that students themselves have a right to know what they're learning at every increment of the learning journey in the language that they understand, in the language that employers understand, so that learning outcomes are not language on a syllabus that has no real sort of substantive meaning for students or employers, but actually that that learning outcomes reflected true competencies and skills that students could connect to the real world of work. And as they complete assignments in any course, they can see collectively how they're making progress towards those skills along their learning journey. In the Guided Pathways framework, the first activity that most of us did as colleges was we put together course sequences. The problem with ending there with course sequences as thinking of that as the ladder of learning, which also speaks to what Marty Alvarado was talking about with regard to trying not to think about learning ladders in terms of courses, is that there's no way for students to see their development across those courses in the language of skills. And we really at Chafee decided that skills and learning outcomes should be synonymous with one another. And so, of course, getting to that place of measuring learning at every increment of the journey for students in a language that is skill-based and being able to have data on that, and for the students to have that data reflected at the time with the current learning outcomes assessment processes, it just, didn't seem possible with the technology that existed. But we knew that we weren't going to accept anything less than that because we know that's what our students need. And so from there, we really started pasting together the systems that we had. We knew digital credentialing systems like Credly or Canvas Credentials would provide a way for students to see and be recognized for what we thought we taught them. And then we also knew that Canvas, has rubrics, and it can technically measure if faculty are implementing rubrics at every assignment, and those rubrics are attached to learning outcomes. That those data could feed into those digital credentialing systems. Of course, there weren't tools to connect those systems at scale in the way that we wanted to. So that's when we started talking with Instructure and their custom development department to build new technology. So, but we wouldn't have done any of those things if we first didn't establish a vision for what we wanted, and then not let the constraints of our environment tear us down from trying to reach those goals. So Trey, next one.
All right. So if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Marty gave us that practice makes progress. I'm going to vibe off that a little bit and say movement makes progress as well, right? So a big piece of our journey, I'll limit it by time, it's been 4+ years. But at the very beginning, we had a vision of what it could be. And because we didn't let the constraints go, we then said, let's just start eating away at this elephant. Not putting a time on it, but also making sure that we meet these milestones. So what that looked like was core team of 2, me and Matt. The first thing we did was we said, is this possible? And if so, how might it look? So we created a proof of concept, meaning that we were saying, this is what we have. We have these systems, we have these people, we have these resources. Can we make it work with this? And if so, what does it look like? We had that proof of concept, and then we brought in some allies and said, hey, would you mind piloting this and testing it out for us? as champions, just to see if it works, if it makes sense to you from your perspective, from the faculty lens, from a student lens. Does it make sense? And then when we launched it, and they came back and they said, yeah, this makes sense. This may work. And we did a soft launch. It was organic, meaning that it wasn't like this big deal. It wasn't an institutional initiative. It was, hey, there's something in the system. If you want to play with it, you can. And those were our key milestones of just saying, we have it. Let's put it in. Let's see if people are interested. Let's talk about it a little bit. And then let's see if it gains traction. And if not, let's adapt and pivot. We weren't going to abandon. We were going to adapt and pivot. So that organic launch really helped us to figure out if it was going to be feasible to be institutionalized and scaled up, right? And once we identify that, yes, faculty understand it, they like it, they can do it, then we were able to then add on those institutional and structural elements to help us scale, which meant having the technology be a little bit more streamlined. So that's when we entered into that partnership with Canvas to say, we know this works because we have this proof of concept, but it's a very manual process. We're going to need to automate some of these pieces. We also then could say, what are those faculty supports? Because if we want to scale up, we need to support our faculty in understanding, being aware, and being able to use. So are there faculty support systems that we already have in place, or do we need more, right? Do we have those faculty peer mentors? Do we have the ideas who can help and assist faculty? We were able to identify those structural elements that were going to be necessary as we grew. But the key piece is we didn't put a timeline on it. We let it happen organically. And as long as we were progressing, we celebrated, right? And so that's that piece of, we knew it was going to be a long haul. We didn't know how long. Truth be told, 4 years is pretty short for us because we weren't sure how long it was going to take, but we knew that this is where we need to be. And so we had to celebrate those moments of, yes, we have it in the system. Yes, we have data coming out of Canvas and it makes sense. Hey, we're able to share these success stories with others and gain some additional traction with our college. So that's a key piece in this journey is time is relative, right? So we don't need to set time, but we do need to set milestones so that we know that we are progressing forward. So let's talk about, those are our 3 principles of practice. Again, those are sort of those values of what we were going to do as a core team. We had our core team. We're not going to let constraints hold us back. And we're going to keep celebrating progress and moving forward along this work. So let's talk about priorities. I'm going to let Matt take this first priority of how we're centering students' power and agency in this work.
So one of our first priorities was based on this issue of the lack of trust in higher education, which again, Marty Alvarado spoke to at quite length. This is, that was not all planned, but this works perfectly. And so this proverb, you don't test the depths of a river with both feet, really speaks to what we thought at the time and still think the student experience largely is like in higher education right now. The idea that all students need to get a degree and that will improve their quality of life requires students to jump into the river with both feet and trust us sometimes for up to 6 years or 8 years, depending on how long, a student's pathway is to get a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree after a bachelor's degree, multiple transfer points along that pathway without ever having a sense of trust in the outcome that that society has kind of promised and sold them on the value of a degree. And I think this is a big reason why the public has lost a lot of trust in higher ed. It's a big reason why students tap out early, because here they are jumping in this river because they were told that it will take them where they need to go, and they're drowning in our processes and in our pathways, which are confusing and they're obscure, and there isn't really clear outcomes for them, at least in terms of employment at the end, for the majority of the degrees that we offer. Of course, like many CTE programs and such have a clear employment outcome, but the majority of our students are actually in transfer and liberal arts pathways that, while have great value and importance in our societal tapestry, they are the outcomes for them are very obscure. And so what we wanted to do was create a system where it didn't matter what degree you're in, that every degree is a workforce degree. Every degree has clarity for students as soon as they dip their toe in the water. Meaning, so when they take that first English class, that first English composition class in semester 1, because maybe they chose a general studies degree because their friend told them that that's the most flexible degree that you could choose and it's the easiest to get through, right? Which is a common data story that we see in our higher education system in the community colleges. We wanted to make sure that every assignment that they were completing, that they had a story that they could tell that made that assignment contextualized in the real world for them. And so when they complete an assignment in English and then another assignment in another general education class like sociology, even if they're an undecided major, those assignments have skills that are attached to them. They're being assessed for their competency in those skills, and then they're able to link those skills out to keywords in Indeed.com where they can see those skills contextualized in the real world of work. And this starts to bridge the gap and create chain of custody data relationships between every increment of learning that we say matters to the real world outside. And ideally, hopefully, we could live in a world where students don't need to get a degree to make good on the skills that they've developed, but instead that they carry with them accomplishment of their competency gains to the point at which they can utilize them in the real world. And that the world of work also doesn't hold the degree as the only benchmark or a major benchmark for how they conduct hiring. That's the kind of world we're trying to push into with this work. Trey?
All right. So I'm going to put on my instructional designer hat on for a minute because language is important. And so as I worked with faculty and departments to identify the skills that were currently in their curriculum, the big piece was being intentional in naming what we are teaching, right? Naming what we think we're developing as students engage in that experience. But that also speaks to this next proverb that says to come out of one's house means learning, right? And if we take the first house we came out of, which is, our mother's womb, as soon as we came out, we were learning, right? So what does it mean? Let me see if I can correct that real quick. There we go. So what does it mean when a learner comes to our campus and they want to learn there, right? Because and this is going to tie into Marty's the honeycomb that Marty shared with us, because students are coming in with experiences, lived experiences, worldviews, a way of being on this earth. So what does it mean when they come to our space, our college, and say, I want to learn something else, or maybe more, right? To me, that means I'm coming in with all of my lived experiences and worldview. And now I'm going to be exposed to more information that's either going to confirm and affirm what I already know, or it's going to be different. And then I have to make a decision to either accept or reject, or something in between. Maybe take a little bit of what's relevant and what I think I need and adjust to who I am as a person and a citizen of this earth. So if that's what learning means when they come to the campus, how do we know that learning has occurred? If it's really a personal perspective of I'm coming in with these lived experiences and I want to see what jives with what I know and what's going to help me move forward as a person and as a community member to my family and to others. So how do we begin to assess what we mean to say that learning happened? To say, aha, the light bulb went on. And so working with faculty with the Chafee model, one of the conversations I always have with faculty is, you're doing the work, right? We know that what you're developing is relevant and good, but we have to be able to express that in a way that makes sense to not only us as an organization, but to students. And so that, to me, when we're looking at assessment, is not only the language of what are we assessing, but it's also the level at which we're assessing, right? Because yes, I can take an English course, but if I'm not an English major, do I need to go that in depth? What do I need to learn so that I can use it for my purposes as opposed to another hat that I wear as a professional? So that is an ongoing conversation, right? The way that we structured our process at Chafee was to tell faculty to review your course and identify what is meaningful and align it to that language, to the skill language. We are not, disciplinarians of 50 different disciplines, but we do want you to be more intentional in calling out what you're doing and aligning it so that it's more transparent to others. In an instructional design frame of reference, I'm not going to go and redesign your course because I know your course is good, right? I'm going to, as an expert, the course is good. But I do want you to be more intentional in calling out what you're doing so it's more transparent. And that helped with the process of faculty understanding that this is an ongoing process. It's not a hard stop to say, I have to go and revamp my curriculum or change things. It's that I need to evolve and make it so that it's more transparent and intentional and aligned to what's relevant, so students can make choices about what skills they need and how they're building their own honeycomb so that they can do what they need to do. But does it matter, Matt? Does all this that we have said, does it even matter?
Yeah, and I think that's the wonderful thing now that we have literally hundreds of thousands of data points about what we think we're teaching students. So to Trey's point, right, faculty, they have now named across both technical skills and broad-based durable skills, what they believe that they're teaching in their courses. And we have that data coming out of the system, and students are able to see that data in the form of digital credentials and this outcome alignment tool within Canvas. They're able to trace the accomplishment of earning recognition for a competency all the way back to the constellation of assignments that we as an institution believe made up that recognition of proficiency. But it's I don't think what we realized beginning the work is getting to this point would feel more like the beginning than the end. All I ever wanted was to get to a transparent, scalable outcomes assessment, direct assessment process. And now that we're here, there's this bigger question looming, which is, okay, so now we've named the skills that students are learning, and we have a lot of backup data to trace to where we think that learning took place. But what we don't know now is does what we think we are teaching actually matter to students and their futures? We haven't closed the loop on that. And that is such a future-oriented SLO kind of question that we rarely even are able to get to because we're just struggling to get to the place where we have data on what we think we're teaching. To get to the place where we then can ask, what has been the impact of what we're teaching in their real lives? And how are external partners viewing those students in their ways of engaging in the workplace? Does it back up what we certified? If we say a student is proficient in collaboration because they completed a general education pattern and that's part of our institutional learning outcome framework, and we certify that for every single degree, and then they're in the world of work and we ask employers to evaluate students on collaboration and we've certified that, is it backed up? I mean, that's the beginning of the next conversation that needs to happen, because what's the point of any of this if we're certifying learning and the world that students step into reflects at them that they haven't learned what we told them that they learned? It's almost like we've sold them fool's gold. So that's a very like existentially frightening thought. And I honestly didn't think, you could probably hear the emotion in my voice, I really didn't think I would be feeling that as deeply as I am now that we're kind of at this phase in the arc of development of the work. But if anything, at this point, I have more questions now that we have all this data and I can see, okay, I can call out a student ID number and look at the constellation of learning outcomes and backup assignments for that student and see that they've earned digital credentials and it's linked into keywords in real jobs. But I don't actually have any idea whether or not when that student goes into that job, whether they'll be able to demonstrate what we said we taught them. And that is just like absolutely petrifying because it calls into question the entire nature of what we're doing, right? So we need to start to close the loop on that. We need to start to bring the employer partners and work-based learning into the discussion. And that's our next priority for this work. And I think for our student learning outcomes assessment work in general. I'm no longer at Chafee, but I think of this work as collective and national, maybe even global. So Trey, you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, let's do a quick pause. I've been, let me just go out of here just for a brief minute, because sometimes I need to just see boxes or faces of boxes to see if we have any questions or thoughts before we go into the working session part of other sharing stories.
I can ask one that as Matthew was just saying. Can you hear me? First of all, is the mic better now? Okay. I undid my Bluetooth. I'm so sorry, y'all. Yeah, I'm just wondering, to that point about the impact, are you right now at least collecting, I shouldn't say at least, but as a first point, where students go next? Is that even, because I know what you're talking about, the employer stuff, that's really complicated, but even just knowing where they're going next, that post completion, next step, I guess, or
yeah, I think that's the work that we're all struggling with at the community college system, and there's two pieces to that, right? There's where do they go next in terms of transfer, right? And sometimes we look at transfer as like a completion of a goal, but it really isn't. It's just another step on the learning, right? And as a system, we don't have really like the where do they go next questions that I'm most interested in are wages, wage gains, and actual job roles, right? And relationship of those job roles to programs of study. And now, because we have the data, skills that we say they learned while on this journey. We, you know, that the system doesn't have great answers for that. So, you know, some of us have contracts with Equifax where we can do some piecing together of data where we look at wage gains, but then that doesn't include the actual job roles that students have. The tools that we try to find job roles usually involve like scraping LinkedIn and things like that, and so or surveys, which are even worse. So those data questions are quite fuzzy and but to your point, right? Not letting constraints limit where we need to think about what our priorities are for where we need to go. I think that these are definite priorities and we can't let go of it. We need to be relentless in pursuing those as the questions that need to be answered, because how can we say to a student when they enter with us with any degree of confidence what they're likely to accomplish if we have literally no data to show them about what a student who went through this pathway actually gained? You know, like that is crazy to me that we can't answer that question for a student. Like, oh, what are the actual wages that I can expect to earn after this degree based on what other students have done before me? We cannot answer that question. And so we need to.
Yeah, it's tough for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, Matt, if you don't mind, this is just a follow-up question to this, because again, I'm really taken aback by your phrase that we've been selling, you know, fool's gold. That's just, you know, it's terrifying. You're absolutely right, and you know, I'm not surprised that you know, people get emotional about it. It's you know, these are ideas whose time has come. And we've been talking about this, you know, in our circles here for quite a while. So I'm certainly very, very, very happy to see the reflection of our thinking here. We've been on the right track. The question that I would have for you is what about our institutional effectiveness? I think that your statement is just so very humbling, you know, when I think about it. Why? Well, I mean, I know why we are doing what we are doing. What would it take to make the concepts that you just described, right? Assessment of student learning as an information or disclosure of what it is that students have at their disposal to make their lives better. Why, how is that going to become part of our discussion, institutional effectiveness? I mean, when you think about it, if we start, you know, whatever the bar, whatever the data tells us, and this is a starting point, no matter how low, we would still have much more pride into what it is that we are doing, right? When you think about it, we are actually impacting students' lives instead of just, you know, making sure that we are accountable to attendance and retention rates, right? I mean, faculty don't teach for students to persist. That's the name of the game, though.
Right. And I want to be very clear that when I say that crisis of that sort of existential crisis that I was describing there, I have a lot of confidence in the work that our faculty do with students. I am a former faculty member. I believe I've impacted many students' lives. They write me back and let me know, and you know, ask me for recommendations, and it feels amazing. And so I know that we are impacting people's lives in important and meaningful ways. The problem is we don't have good data to be able to make transparent for students who are going through our system what any of that work is about. And that means that we ask them to jump into the river with both feet and not really know what they're signing up for. And to get to the place of meaningful data transparency where students would really be able to trust a story that we told them about the value of a degree and the skills that they're going to learn, I think we do need to get to some of the places that Michelle was hinting at, which is we need to know, well, what are the wages that we can tell a student that they are likely to earn over time if they complete learning and are certified with these competencies? What are the types of jobs that they really are likely to get? And then most importantly, in the immediate, I think we just need to step on the gas when it comes to work-based learning, and as a system, you know, legislature maybe figure out ways to incentivize that through enhanced apportionment, because right now work-based learning is one of the most marginalized kind of forms of instruction that occurs at the community college system, because it takes such a heavy lift with employer partnerships and placements. But those feedback loops are the only way we get direct information about what our students how our students execute the skills that we think we teach them in the real world. That's the only way we get an objective outside party evaluating students you know, on something that we say we taught them. And as soon as they leave us, we aren't able to really establish those feedback loops in meaningful and nuanced ways. But through work-based learning, we still have them as captive parts of our community, the students, and we then are forming those real life partnerships with employers, and so we can kind of test the road. So one of the things that we did at Chafee to start that work is we created employer verified credentials that mirrored the digital credentials for competency that students gain as we've measured their learning in the classroom and labs. So then when they're in a work experience course, the employers also have the ability to evaluate their demonstration of those skills in the workplace. And we can start to look at evaluation qualitative data from employers to establish, like, what are the gaps that we're seeing in terms of how employers reflect on students execution of skills in the workplace.
And I'll add to that too, Matt. One thing that we did this past semester related to work-based experience is understand that we had student workers on campus. So part of that process of piloting and soft launching was we can do it right here on campus. We have students who are working in our various departments, developing these skills in a work environment. Let's use this as a way to say, what does that process look like to get work verified credentialing done? And so even though we had students outside of the campus, we also used that framework for our student workers on campus, which meant every single department that has student workers went through that process as well. And that really helped, again, from an institutional perspective, of really making those connections of how is this relevant, what we're doing on campus relevant and important for impacting students' lives.
And it's important to, you know, use when we're using student workers as a living lab, that we're also using the same rubrics. So we're using the same processes of outcomes assessment. And this is also true with co-curricular activities and student services. We're using the same exact ILO, institutional learning outcome rubrics for those activities as are used in the classroom.
Okay, any other questions or thoughts? Just make sure you raise your hand or put them in the chat. I'm going to bring us back to some tangible next steps. And Matt, I skipped a couple of slides just for time, but I think we can get to what we need to get to with this question here for the community of how do we accelerate this work? We've identified some priorities and practices, but are there others that could help us collectively accelerate this work to make a positive impact for our students who are coming to us? And you can drop it in the chat or open up a mic. And this can be based on your experiences of doing this work. Are there some other things that maybe Matt and I haven't shared that you have found helpful in accelerating your progress on this journey?
And so we don't bury the lead, we're going to put an opportunity for you to actually write down some commitments, and then we'll follow up with practitioners in 6 months in the spirit of community practice. And think about where you might go in relation to Dr. Alvarado's talk as well, right? We're trying to use this as an opportunity to create some momentum to push into the future.
And don't be shy, because we know we're not a shy group. How long did it take to agree upon the ILO rubrics used for all areas of the conversation?
That was a 2-year, well, I mean, if we think about it in iteration, it really was a 4-year process, but 2 years from the beginning of the official ILO reform process that took place in Faculty Senate. But preceding that was a lot of that pilot work and sort of grassroots champion work that was occurring behind the scenes that Trey mentioned, where faculty had started to put employability skill rubrics in their courses and connected those to digital credentials, which then created the environment for Faculty Senate officially to say, we're going to commit to this as an institution. But it was the specific individuals on Faculty Senate who also happened to be part of our outcomes assessment committee. And so all of that who made those, who led those subcommittees and from Faculty Senate to make sure that the entire campus committed to a set of rubrics, which also were hotly contested. I mean, there were lots of debates about what goes in, what goes out, what should be the language. You know, I don't want to make it seem like it, you know, these committees and, you know, structures within our organizations like Faculty Senate or outcomes assessment committees are just kind of like bodies. You know, they're made up of people, and it was really the connections of the people on those bodies to the work itself that made it possible for the institution to create those commitments.
And then I will always also add, because I'm seeing it with our disciplinary skills, part of that 2-year time frame is that you really have to kick it around. So there was draft language presented to say, this is where we're going to start with the language. And as faculty began to use it, then that was the closed loop piece of, they came back around and said, this language doesn't work. So we now need to change it. And then that process started to say, okay, what steps do we need to change that language? But we always gave, same with the disciplinary or technical skills. We're going to give you language. You can massage it at the very beginning, but then use it, because when you use it, you'll then say, I need to tweak it again. So that's going to be part of that timeline as well.
Yeah, I'm going to ask, because Kathleen, you asked a great question. I'm going to ask that if you could put a commitment, even from what, I don't know what your position is, but whatever it is, if you could, from your positionality, put a commitment at the 6 and 12 month mark in the Padlet to get to that place, to just help nudge towards the reality that you're talking about, right? Agreement around language and ILOs. That would be wonderful. And Susan, you also put a great roadblock in there, which is how to, you know, the unwillingness of faculty to devote the time and effort. So if you could put some, try to think of like strategies for the 6 and 12 month mark. For us, we strategized a lot around funding to overcome that roadblock. We made sure that there was always a huge pipeline of funding going into this work, and that it was, there was a lot of advocating up to make sure that leadership was going to be okay with the use of the funds for supporting it. And so we dumped, we hired a whole we hired Trey's role, a whole digital credentialing systems designer at a very high level, to assist faculty. So there's a lot of strategies, but yeah, if you could put some in there, that would be awesome. Because then we can kind of turn that into a beehive of practice. Michelle, I see your hand.
Well, Matthew, since you just mentioned the funding and so forth, Jane's question there is about were the faculty or department chairs compensated for any of this work? Was that part of that too?
Everything, yeah. So we really compensated very generously for this work. We used Title V money. We used strong workforce. I was always hunting for, in the beginning, we used CBCOEI CTE funding. And so I was always hunting for what are the dollars, that was my role as an administrator, right? I feel like everyone has their position that they have to play. And in my role as administrator, I need to make sure there was always that the road was clear with up above us in terms of our execs were backing it. And then there was just constant cash coming down to make sure that we could support it, because our faculty, they do so much work unpaid anyway, and for the good of changing our colleges, like these rock stars that Trey mentioned. And honestly, there isn't like, we couldn't pay them enough, in my opinion, for the amount of work that they put into this. And so I wanted to make sure that we were always compensating it to a place where they felt like it was appropriate. And yeah, and so yeah, we compensated the faculty who were on the outcomes assessment committee. We compensated faculty in departments to do curriculum work over the summer. We compensated, even we created a kind of an assistant to the faculty as outcomes assessment coordinator. So there was another faculty member who is paid to support that role as well, and that person would be in training to take over as outcomes assessment coordinator the following year. So a lot of succession planning that was also compensated.
That's great. Thank you.
And
Oh, good.
I'll just do one more. I saw Susan's statement. And I will give you my perspective of that, because we know that change is going to take some time and effort. And so it's strategy. Being able to at least identify the skills and align them is the first step. But then gradually, when they go through this process, faculty know that they need to change curriculum. The number one question I always get when I'm working with faculty is around support. Who's going to help me with this? Because I'm already doing 101 things, right? And so it's that piece of, as long as they're aware they got to change, we can work with you on that timeline on change. And so I think that's that first step of at least acknowledging that it's going to take some time to do it, but then identifying from an organizational perspective of, do we have support for when faculty or departments are ready to actually do the change? Because that's been, the big holdup for a lot of folks that say we want to do this, but it's a lot of work. And we don't have necessarily those supports there yet.
My other question, when you guys were talking about the ILO rubrics, I wondered if, so are the faculty also using those ILO rubrics down at their course level? Or, because I was thinking about, the mapping of course, program, and then ILOs, because it came up in relation to like the student workers and doing those assessments. So I just wondered, how is that piece? Because that's such the high level. And then, some of those competencies are so specific to programs that, so.
Yes, it's an and. So the institutional learning outcomes, or that breadth, the relational skills, are automatically placed in every single course in Canvas.
Okay.
And departments have conversation to say which of those, there's 48 learning outcomes, which 3 or 4 are we prioritizing in our department? That doesn't mean that we're not assessing others or developing others, but as a department, we're going to focus on these 3 because we know for sure that those are important in our discipline. And then they let the faculty decide based on their courses, which of those 3 or 4 makes sense. The disciplinary ones are worked at the department level. And so faculty then, because they're at the instance of Canvas, can just pull in their department folder for their course. So it's going to be both of them will be assessed.
Thank you so much. Right. And that gets into that Canvas structure, which I know is, that's something we talk about in that Canvas community of practice. So anyone who's working on that in your own, building it out like Trelisa's done and the team there, we welcome you to that. So that link's in there. But anyway, thank you. We are at time for this session. Thank you both so much. This has been awesome. And turning it over to the next person who is introducing our final speaker. Thank you all.
And that would be my great joy to be able to introduce Nickawanna Shaw. She brings 27 years of higher education experience. She's inspired by her student parent, single mother to advocate for equitable access for all. Her career began on the East Coast, eventually transitioning into the California Community College system, where she served 17 years as kinesiology faculty. During this time, she embedded student support practices into her curriculum and introduced wellness-focused coursework, including meditation and support for veteran students reintegrating after active duty service. She's dedicated 17 years as a faculty in the CCC system, serving as the College Academic Senate. Serving in the college's academic senate, 8 years as president and 2 as curriculum chair. As co-chair of a DEI gap analysis, she evaluated policies and practices to uncover barriers to student and staff success using the USC Equity Toolkit. Nickawanna served as Dean of Language Arts and Library at Citrus College. She holds a master's degree from Smith College in Exercise and Sports Studies and a bachelor's from Mount Holyoke College in Fine Arts with additional graduate work in andragogy, multicultural counseling, and online teaching and learning. It's so hard to sum up such a fantastic person in 2 bios. I've had such great conversations with Nickawanna. She is currently a vice president at the ACCJC. Are you ready?
That's a mouthful. I think we could have left like half of that out and just been like, she's been busy.
We could have,
Like
but I
everybody
wanted
else
to
on the
capture
call,
how
she's been busy.
how people can see it, all the amazing things you have. So this is really designed to be an interactive session with Nickawanna, both as her experience, what you heard in the CCC system and in education in general, but also as a vice president of ACCJC. So I'm going to kick it off with questions, but please, this again is supposed to be interactive. It's our last session of the day. So as you have questions, please put them in the chat. And our first question, and I like to put them in the chat for our speakers and for everybody else, because I'm a visual person, and so I know others might benefit as well. So are you ready?
I'm ready,
Oh,
Amanda.
all right. So with your 27 years of experience in higher education, how have you seen assessment practices evolve to better support equitable student outcomes?
So in that time, I think assessment, I started on the East Coast, so the culture of the relationship between commissions and institutions are very different than they are on the West Coast. My experience moving west is the California system and colleges in general are a lot more independent. This is still a bit like the Wild West. We're still norming what we consider to be, I think, a concerted and authentic response to external pressures to label what we do in particular ways, even though we have very vastly different communities. And so I can see that from a different standpoint, the changes I've seen as a faculty member specifically are faculty are far more conversant in assessment than they were back when I moved here in the early 2000s. And by that, I mean, our practices aren't so internal to our courses or to our disciplines. We are having public conversations about these things. The symposium itself is probably a night and day difference between the resources and community folks had when thinking sort of broadly about planning and education and long-term goals, being able to have a dialogue that I came in at the tail end and was fascinated by the fact that you're like, what are our 6-month goals? What are our 12-month goals? How will we have a community of practice where we can have engagement support, right? Not just holding each other accountable, but like the desire for growth and meaningful sort of check-ins with each other. Was unheard of in my experience as new faculty coming to the state. So I think the outward behaviors, the cooperative, social nature of sharing assessment, even though we know it may look very different on the ground in different places, there used to be a fear of if it doesn't conform, then it will be called out, as opposed to allowing authentic assessment to happen. The culture is so much more positive that I think we really do better assessment just because there's less fear about what we'll find, how we'll address it at the faculty level. And I do say at the faculty level, because I know that in certain communities, the support is very different, and that I heard on the call comments like, and how is this, I think it was Matthew, how is this being funded? How is this work being supported? the conversation of the amount of effort and the human hours is still very much in development in a lot of places around the state when it comes to doing this kind of work and all sorts of support work for which there aren't enough hours for single faculty to do on their own. So there are some conversations I think are settled. That idea of support and engagement and sort of that external authentic conversation, I think is robust and beautiful. I still think there are working condition conversations that are nascent, but at least happening and openly. And that is better than I think many decades of from the faculty end, unsupported or mandates or expectations. We have to acknowledge that there's only so many hours a day. So how do we do that work in a way that's equitable, not just for students, but for instructors, is still one of those questions that I think we're grappling with as a community of practice.
I love your emphasis on our willingness and ability to share with one another and being transparent with one another. That's often what I see with faculty is it takes a little bit of time, but once they do open up, it just becomes this much more collaborative, open experience. And they're demonstrating to their students, this vulnerability that before we were so afraid as faculty, at least me myself, to be able to show. I felt I need to know everything. And then as soon as I realized, oh my goodness, I don't know everything, and I can be okay with that with my students, I can be okay with that as my teacher, it floored me how much teacher to my students and my colleagues, how much better of an instructor I became when I acknowledged that I don't know everything. So I love that you emphasize that. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you saying that because I think there is an unspoken standard because of the origins of higher education that we are not students, right? That we stop being students at some point. And so it feels like a sort of Velcro sort of boundary of like, can I rip myself free of this idea of being, a cemented PhD, a cemented graduate degree holder, as opposed to someone who has an expertise and who has learned so many things, but there's a world of things to learn, right? You can't absorb all of human knowledge about any subject in a handful of years, especially as cultivated as many degree programs are, to have you focus on very narrow pieces of a body of work to show your expertise. Learning is never, I don't think, if at any point we find ourselves being able to say, I know everything about this, we should hopefully have a moment of pause to question, like, where did that need to say that come from? Am I searching for some sort of validation or protection from a system that hasn't shown its trust in my abilities? Or I feel like a lot of that need for perfection comes from needing a justifiable sort of experience of needing to sort of defend the primacy of faculty work.
Exactly. Oh, I love hearing you talk. Marty Alvarado talked a lot about what you're saying in an earlier session about just this ability to learn from all of these different areas and bring that in and acknowledging it for students and connecting that to our work as faculty and acknowledging that we also have all of these multifaceted areas to be able to learn and bring to bear on our work as faculty or whatever capacity we are in the higher education system. All right, you ready for your next one? And please,
Give it to
again,
me.
as you hear Nickawanna speak and your mind becomes on fire like mine, put your questions in the chat. This is very open format. All right, here we go. So how does your experience with the ACCJC, Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges, inform your perspective on effective assessment practices?
I feel like that's probably the easiest question. So Amanda did warn me about some of these questions in advance. So I wouldn't come in and be like, like a job interview. So I appreciate that. I think this one is one of the clearest places where we can see how the commission works, because our standards for effective assessment practices are developed by the membership. And so what I've noticed as someone who was a co-chair for a team, pre-tenured faculty, someone who became a member of a team, someone who became a commissioner now in this role, as I've seen those standards change over time, the sophistication of the membership and what they are looking for has changed. So what ACCJC's part in that is essentially making sure that those standards are applied fairly, but the guts of the standards, those are written by members from member institutions. So 80 different people volunteer their human hours to us for free to try to elevate the conversation from where we were, which as a community maybe was a little bit more, the specificity was on documentation and proving things, but we have a great history of accredited institutions. And so the membership has sorted out through the last few decades of experience. We don't need 127 standards. And so really assessment has found its way into every standard. But part of it is we've taken out everything that was unnecessary. So we're not distracted by that. You know, we say we want data-informed decisions. You can't really make data-informed decisions about 127 different things, right? It's one of the reasons that made the standards in the ICER the size of a Vogue magazine, right? You could do leg lifts and kill a burglar with it. And now it's smaller for the reason the membership have decided we're not going to nitpick each other anymore. We're going to ask for what's important. And we all have that standard of making sure that we have authentic decisions based on our communities. If we were setting an artificial standard outside of the membership, we could say everyone must have 30% this, right? That's not our role, and it's also not our value. It's not the community's values either. So I think assessment practices are more effective because the questions being asked, one, there's fewer, two, they're clearer, and because we provide the rubrics and sort of the samples of standard behaviors that are all accredited behaviors, it allows folks to either qualitatively or quantitatively understand the question and to be able to craft the questions the follow-up questions for assessment. What are we doing? Who is it for? Why, is it successful? And how do we know it's successful? And then ultimately, what do we keep and what do we change? It's a bit like writing an English 101 paragraph for anyone out there who is helping our students to be literate through English 101. The questions that we are asking now that the membership is asking us to hold the group accountable for are just that. What are we doing here? Who is it for? Right? You need to have assessment data and practices to know, and you can do this in any part of the academy. You can do it in student services programs. You can do it in a section of a course. What's the goal? We already know the course objectives. We already know the student learning outcomes. So we know, what is this for? Great. Who's benefiting? We get course level data. Or qualitatively inside the course, do I feel like this assignment, this assessment, this learning moment, engagement moment, was it successful? It doesn't always have to be, your IR office sending you 12 pounds of data. It can be you're in the moment and because as educators, it's an art. Is the vibe in the room working or is it not? Right. And then documenting that, you can qualitatively document, maybe, use the vibe in the room wasn't kosher today. This is what we need to do. We have to allow the language of assessment to be authentic. And I think because institutions set standards are set by institutions, not by the commission, that is a way that allows for effective assessment practices. No two institutions report exactly the same data. There's a lot of commonality because you all don't want to have to do something different than what's being asked by the chancellor's office. And so there's a lot of overlap and commonality there. But there is no top-down expectation of this is how you do something. This is what it should look like. The word should isn't showing up, at least at our end. And I think because of the membership changes in the standards, it's not showing up at your end either. But we think as we move into the new set of standards, have to kind of grow out of that expectation of hand slaps that are sort of historically associated with the relationship at all levels, from the faculty side and also from the commission end too. That decades old sort of zeitgeist is still sort of lurking in the system. And so I think there are a lot of ways in which practices inside the standards, inside the development of the commission over our recent history as things have changed, probably dramatically for some who've been engaged for a long period of time. How that change is really evident in the standards that we have now and the kinds of work that we do, but also just in the very simple fact that we don't prescribe a way to do what you do. We understand that it's an art and that every institution has different students, different resources, different scope. But ultimately, to be honest, the only scope any institution has that it's in common is student success. How you get there is going to look really different. So for us, it's like, are your students successful? And then you tell us how you got to that. So for my end, it's super easy.
I feel like you've answered so many elements of this next question, and I'm gonna put in the chat if you have anything to add. As I was reading it, trying to pair it up, I'm like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
you're just like a mind reader. So how can the ACCJC standards support colleges in aligning student learning outcomes with meaningful, measurable indicators of both academic excellence and equity, while still respecting each college's local process and decision making? Again, you touched on so many of these elements in your other answer, your previous answer, but what do you want to add?
I think the piece around alignment, right? So I did sort of finish up talking about how institution set standards are really set by an institution. Could you imagine if we said, you must quantify all of these things? And we can talk about diversity in many different ways, or disproportionately impacted groups in many different ways. While we do have a plurality of California community colleges, we do have other member institutions who do make up a large portion of our membership. We have institutions that might be listed singularly, but that have 20 or 30 campuses. And so it is fairly robust, the other segment of schools that we have that do the same work. I think the way in which it becomes meaningful and aligned is that we start the question with, when we're looking at success and measurable indicators, what's your mission? If we don't understand coming in your culture, your mission, your language, which is why we, in the portfolio model, that's easier for us to do. My role with colleges and with the commission are to be there to do the code switching that sometimes needs to happen so that teams understand institutions. Even though our process has now been elongated so that it's less bumpy, there's still a level of trying to help folks along the way remember the mission of the college so they can see them accurately. And so the part that I would talk about with alignment is there's alignment through the process, which is to help the team, the college, and ultimately commissioners understand the language of the institution as the ICER travels. From the college's end with alignment, there's the piece around understanding that your work is about your mission, and the mission is student success. Every choice you make is about student success. If you're writing about something else that isn't student success, well, there's something for you to either decide its value and be clearer about it, or decide it's not a part of the work that needs to get done. If it's something that distracts you from mission, which is student success, it's the ability of the college in that moment to go, does this really align? Is this really where our physical human capital time that it needs to go, right?
I've had the opportunity for our college to go through with the new standards. We just finished our ICER and have done the review and then be on a peer review team. And I've loved in my conversations with you and with our own representative at our own college, just mission is not just that 2-word statement of what the college is. The mission is so much more. And it really took me a lot of time to get that out of my head is, no, our mission is this statement. This is what the mission is, or this is what the college mission is. And you did so well of gently guiding me in our conversations of it's not just that statement. It is so much more about that. So I know I didn't give you this question beforehand, but can you help others see that as well, that what ACCJC, when they say mission, is not just that 2 words, this is the mission statement of the college, but what that really means.
If you think, I love the analogy because it worked for me as a faculty member, untenured faculty, had never been at a California community college. I had been 18 months in and I found myself as the co-writer of Standard 1 and also wanted to get tenure, so didn't want to mess up our accreditation. So I found myself in a very anxious way, being very curious about what all this meant. I love complex systems. And what I love about them is that they are fascinating, the decisions people make to come to, the structure of our standards over time. You can see the care and thoughtfulness that went into it. And I love to simplify those things. So for me, when I think about mission, I have to think about the standards. If you think of the standards as we're building a house. Standard 1 is the frame of the house. Standard 2 is who lives in it. Standard 3 is all the stuff inside that makes it run, that makes it comfortable, the creature comforts, but also sort of how it works. And then standard 4 is how do we keep this from being anarchy? It's who are the leaders in the house that make sure things get done. For the inhabitants of the house, it's sort of the culture and ways that things happen. So it's not so much the day-to-day, but like, what are the rules of this house? Every house has a culture. If you think of growing up in your family's home, you understood the things that were inbounds and out of bounds and who had responsibility for what, and what we all did together to keep the community going. But it's more of the cultural piece, the guidance of that, development of that. So when I think about mission, it's everything that permeates standard 1, right? Of course, there's a mission statement, but in standard 1, when you decide on your institution set standards, you're talking about who lives in that house and what you're doing for them. And what you're measuring are your intentions with how you're going to use all of the effort in standard 2, support, and all of the resources in standard 3 to make sure the people that the house is for are taken care of. Right. And so mission is when you decide where your attention and money and goals are going, that is how you are in different ways expressing your mission. If those things aren't matching, it's easy to see as an outsider because you're reading someone's report and you go, they say that their mission is all of these things, that this is the shape of the house and the house has bricks. And then you get to standards 2 and 3 and you're like, but there's all sorts of glass and steel and it looks like an Art Deco house over here. Right. And so that example for me comes up when I think of in standard 1, when we talk about authentic student learning, and we get to standard 2 and we talk about online ed, but then we see that students maybe don't have the resources, that sort of technical glass house with the stainless steel, when colleges take on a lot of technology, but students and staff don't have the capacity to use those things just yet. That for me is like when I think about that disconnect in my head, it's like the style of the house is maybe not the same as the access of the participants living in the house, right? And so those things are all about mission. Where our there's a great analogy that says basically resources flow to where your attention is going. We talk about it with ourselves. If your attention's going this way, that's where all your energy's going. The same can be said for an institution. If what we talk about spending our time on is not helping the people in standard 1 that we describe in our institution set standards, in our demographic look or our fact book about ourselves, then there's a disconnect. There's the question. Who are all the things in standard 2 supposed to be helping? And are they? Who are all the resources being spent on, or programs, or access to different services? Where's the money going? Right? It's more than just integrated planning. It's more than just who is in what specialized program. How does what you spend and what you say you're doing connect to the people in standard 1? Who's living in the house? And if those aren't connecting, then the mission, I'm not going to say the mission's not being met. Students are getting educated and graduating. Fantastic work is happening at all levels. Otherwise, we would not be successful at we have clearly successful students in the California community college system. It's bigger than that, right? It's that sense of fatigue some folks feel sometimes when they don't know that the work they're doing is aligned to helping students, which I think is a common conversation that folks have on the side, maybe not publicly, is what I'm doing matter. If we can't, as a community, know that, we have to have those conversations to see, does it really align? And is it aligning in a way where everyone feels like their work is truly valued?
Nickawanna, Stephen asked, because your analogies are just so beautiful. Can you recap?
So Southern.
Can you recap the house metaphor again? Because I do. I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, oh man, I got to pay attention. I can't write notes. I got to try to remember it because it's beautiful.
Jane's like, I got this. But what Jane says is true. Standard 1 is the frame of the house, right? Some of our houses are quite dainty. I think of like Deep Springs. Up in the Sierras, 38 students, right? A farmhouse analogy would be apt, right? And then you think of my neighbor down the street, Mount Sac, right? Large enough to be a California State University, right? Those are two very different houses, but they both live with the same standard. So standard one, what sort of house is it? We're building it for the people who are living there. That's where mission lives. Who are we serving? Standard two, what do they need to be supported to live in that house? Right? It's not just because standard three is what are the resources we're using? Right? The human capital to get that done, the physical capital, right? That building's going to need plumbing. We might like it to look nice and not too much like a prison. Though I work with a lot of urban colleges. And so that idea that things are hardscaped everywhere, sometimes it's just a part of the environment, right? For those who had a bucolic 4-year experience, it might seem really jarring. I went to a college in the middle of a tobacco field, essentially. So it's a very different experience than the experience I've had working at California institutions that are literally in the middle of neighborhoods. It's very different. For me, it was a lot to get used to at first. But standard three, or how are we basically making those resources for what we say folks need in standard two to make that possible? And then lastly, sort of our culture and governance really comes out of culture. We usually think of mission as culture, but mission is like us writing a plan and saying, this is how the plan is going to work. The delegation from the board through the CEO to the rest of us in an institution is really where culture happens. What a board approves, what the community in voting in a board, how that might change, the direction the CEO gets, both publicly and privately, delegation to particular staff. Rules and culture happen through our decision-making, not through the statements on pages.
Thank you.
Hopefully, Stephen, that was a little better, a little slower.
It was gorgeous. I'll speak for Stephen. It was amazing. I've loved how the new standards really do exactly what you're saying, and what the institutional self-evaluation report is meant to do is for the institution to look and see, okay, are all these things in alignment? And I know for our college, we did have to stop and think, we're missing pieces. These things aren't connecting. And with those pared down standards, it was opening the book of our college and going, oh, we weren't lost in the 100 and whatever many, just trying to put all those words in there. It was, no, our college is splayed open. Are we who we say we are? And so I really,
that's the question though, right?
Exactly.
Are we who we say we are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the new standards really help the college to articulate that and see it clearly. At least for us, it did. And I hope other colleges had the same experience.
And I didn't mean to interrupt there, but that question is exciting to me because it's the center of the work that we're doing now through the Transparency Project. We have another 5 of those coming up. The commission is bringing these conversations to you. I know equity is getting bashed right now, but our goal in doing that is we know that everyone doesn't have the ability to travel to a conference to have these conversations. So those conversations are coming to the community as best we can. And so there have been 7 convenings. The commission is getting some funding, but essentially we're also using the funds that you provide for us to exist to pay for those to come out to the community. So we had partners in that in helping us as well. But really are we who we say we are? And it's an important question because the world of higher education has been and will continue to be politically redefined. And we need to have a better sense of being able to clearly tell people who we are. It's not the slogan on the side of the light rail going through town. It's not the clever cover of the catalog we send out for non-credit. It's are students successful? What do we want them to be successful at? And ultimately, who are our students? For many communities, we provide retraining. We provide an opportunity to step into a good paying working job. We provide the ability for them to change their minds and their lives by changing careers and exploring, or for them to continue growing if they're through their careers. We don't just provide traditional education to students who want to transfer to 4 institutions, though That is a big part of what we are doing now because of the downturn in birth rates, right? And so the opportunity to be able to help more folks step into those jobs through either earlier, through dual enrollment of some sort and early college programs, or through lifelong learning and non-credit and maybe CVC OEI, but there's also the money that's being poured into non-credit for workplace training and partnerships. I saw a question in the chat, but with my bad eyes, I'm not sure if I'm going to see it correctly.
I'll go ahead and read it for you. So
Okay.
are we who we say we are? The answer to this question is a place where faculty and academic senate can harness voice and power. Just a thought I've been trying to articulate. What do you think? Who do we want to be and why are we here? Are we meeting those goals?
I think those are amazing questions. I would add to those before you put those on people's plate. And this take it or leave it. This is, true talk. I'm just here to talk story with my friend Amanda, and we've got some people watching us. It feels a little bit like an OnlyFans moment, but it's okay. You all are safe people. So I think the piece that I would add in there, if you're going to do this work with faculty, is I think that I'm dithering because I think you might be surprised that I say this. I don't know that all faculty are heard. So before we ask them who we are, to own who the college is, it's asking them, is a college there for them? Where do they feel as students still in their growth as faculty and as forever students? Because if you chose education, I hope that you also chose to be a forever student. Where in the institution do you feel supported? What has the institution extended to you so that you understand as a faculty your community? I think if the faculty understand their power as an academic community, not just as a union body, and they feel supported in their growth, it's easier to then focus and talk about all the other work that we do. So especially because of Senate, it's not so much a working conditions, but it's what commitment has the institution made so that faculty are able to answer that question about themselves. As an institution, what is it that who are we? What is it that we do? Before turning that focus outward to try to define that for our students, right? Because if it's not the same, that needs to come into alignment. The mission of the institution is also to have a healthy staff. So I don't know that the faculty get asked that question enough so that you as a body can feel like the work that you do together is cohesive, authentic, it's moving toward a mission, and that all parts of it are respected. And I think from there, it's easier to answer those other questions. Does that seem fair? It might sound crazy to some of you, but that's where my head lives on that. If you're not heard, then students can't. Yeah, if you're not heard, then how can you hear your students?
And faculty is such a large body of the college. And so if we're talking about really, are we who we say we are, then we need to make sure that faculty are not all on the same page, because we each have, we need to respect those differences, but we all understand what the college is about, what our own college is about. So, and listen to those voices.
Enrique, why do faculty look at the frame of the house different among our institutions? A lot of that is about the culture of faculty being heard. Do you feel like you have a consistent voice and power across all institutions, even inside of a single system? I think if you had 10 institutions, that might be easier, but you've over 100. And the circumstances, the contracts, the students, all of the contingencies that go that look so different. There isn't a culture amongst managers or board members that really talk about norming that culture so that there's some consistency of practice around care and working conditions and thoughtfulness. Those have evolved over time based on the history of an institution. Institution started in the 60s after the Higher Ed Act, probably have very different histories. They were started during civil rights. The conversations and their history, they're coming to 50 years now, look really different. institutions that were started before Hiram Johnson, before 1911, or in that period, when the state systems were the normal schools were started in California. Many of our state institutions were also founded, have longer histories. Those conversations are really different. And then inside of the communities, whether they've had feast or famine, we have basic aid districts that don't have the cyclical pressures in the same way that smaller institutions that are differently resourced. Right. And so there hasn't been a norming those conversations. If anything, with the downturn in the early aughts and with COVID, the stratification of need and support has only gotten more clearly disparate between institutions. So, you know, part of that is the conversation may need to start with faculty across the board. But I think that is a challenging, I will say that is a challenging conversation. And it doesn't fall just at anyone's particular door. It's the evolution of this system and having so many different institutions inside of it. We get to see the diversity of the same factors playing out in different places. It's a great experiment.
I've always felt so fortunate. The college that I work at is very rural, very community based, and I've always felt that it has helped grounded our general respect that faculty and staff and even administrators have for one another, because you know, you talk to another staff member and their grandmother might have been your Sunday school teacher, or their cousin might play t-ball with their kid. It's very much this community organization, and it seems like it keeps this general level of respect and kindness to one another that could be lacking elsewhere. So I've always felt that, but being very grateful that my college has that, because sometimes they can get lost, and that devolves the conversation when you don't have that general undergirding respect for one another, whether it's faculty, staff, or administrators. I think it's always good to remember. Hard to do sometimes, especially in our current climates, but it's
And
helpful.
size, right? The idea that things need to be scaled quickly, even at the smallest institutions, the pace and the expectations of scale stop our internal development together, right? The faster something needs to happen, the more sort of not disparate, but desperate the decision making needs to be. We tend to skip steps that allow us to get to the same, we still might get to the same answer, right? I know what everyone thinks here. We all work really well together. I'm just going to make this decision. Change management takes the cells in your body need time to change. Your brain needs time to change. Folks working along that process together, they're building connective synaptic responses together. And so when you get to the other end, when you're problem solving, everyone can be near to the same page, the same answer, the same view. We tend to, because of the complexity of organizations, have to make decisions. And if we don't have a culture of communication, it's a bit like building a plane while you're falling from the sky. Every decision feels like it's high stakes, and communication, you can't really communicate while you're screaming, falling out of the sky. You're just like, this is happening, and hope for the best. Right.
That's just such a powerful visual. I gotta try and find a way to remember that, because it's exactly when we operate in chaos, what it does feel like is, how can I communicate? It's almost like a trauma response. How can I communicate soundly if I'm falling out of a plane? I love that.
For folks who have a fear of flying, let me give you something a little less triggering. I like to talk about the box of crayons, right? People who are making decisions at a really fast pace only have like the 3 crayons at Claim Jumper that someone's already used, that some kids already chewed. When we have time to make decisions together, everyone brings their crayons. So you have one person always has that good ideas. They bring the box of 128 with the sharpener on the back. Someone has pencils, someone has, finger paints they made from their grandmother's recipe from flowers out back. You have all of these different sort of options. But when we're stressed, you got the 3 crappy crayons. And we do the best we can to make those tools work for everything. And then afterwards, we go back and try to get other people to come in and co-sign by borrowing their crayons so they can feel like it's their idea and their colors are in the picture too. Right. And for a lot of folks, it's like it's not a good or bad. It's how we've learned to work because of the pace of work, not because of the value of people.
I feel like I have this brewing of a great strategic planning icebreaker that involves 3 crayons and a couple different crayons. I wrote it down because that's
Do
another
it.
great analogy. I'm thinking that is perfect because it is, you take the time to choose the right crayon to use for the right tool when you have time to be able to think and process and choose versus I only have these 3 crayons. I need to do it really quickly. So I'm gonna brew on that for a while. All right, I'm checking the chat. Lots of great back channel taught. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to move on to a much easier topic. I say that in jest. So CBE. So as interest grows in competency-based education and other innovative assessment methods, in what ways does ACCJC's peer-driven approach and federal requirements for financial aid eligibility provide a framework for institutions to explore authentic assessment without prescribing any particular model or pathway?
Sorry, I had a second to laugh at Bethany's comment. That's why those kids are so loud and cranky. They're like, I just got these 3 broken crayons. That's how a lot of your colleagues feel when they get pressure from someone to make a decision. They're like, I want to talk to other people. It has to happen now. But these 3 terrible crayons, they're all different shades of broken blue. What's that? All right, so CBE. There is a lot of interest there because I think there's sincere interest because it's very similar in its way for what it can do for students as CPL, competency-based learning. So CBE and CPL, credit for prior learning, what they are intended to do is to provide students with a path forward. They do that in 2 very different ways. And I think those things are great as innovations. I have nothing bad to say about that. Internally, I think the conversations are authentic and developmental. The pressure from without an institution is about return on investment. How quickly can we get students through? How can we tie these types of programs to industries so that we can start making basically business partnerships? None of these things are inherently bad in and of themselves. It's that inside the institution where the people who do the work, the faculty and staff, support staff live, and outside the institution where our possible partners live, these 2 conversations are not in step with each other as far as the value to the student. Right? We want the student to get connected to a good paying job, and we want them to do it at a pace that is effective for business. Inside the institution, we've all signed on to be lifelong learners, learning for the sake of learning. So putting a time clock on when a student is ready is the nudge in that challenging conversation. How fast can we do something that we consider to be a lifelong skill taking on becoming an academic? I think culturally, there's a misalignment. I don't think there's a misalignment in practice, except when the expectation to do the work internally is coming from outside with so much pressure that there isn't time to do what we've been talking about, to norm together to find an authentic way to do it. So if someone says, we've got $1 million to start a program and we're going to violate all of our policies around faculty hiring and strategic planning in order to hire the people to do this to get that money. Well, some of you might be at institutions where that's happened, and I won't guess what the outcome is, but I know my first response as a former faculty member is to kind of cringe a bit and feel like, well, if we're violating our policies and faculty hiring is a part of 10+1, I see some folks doing the like, okay, like that can become an unnecessary stressor to a possible great opportunity, both internally and externally. So it's, some of these conversations about taking on innovative practices, just remembering that there's a cultural piece to it. And I don't mean see capital culture. I mean, we have practices and procedures around developing programs. I'm sure that all of you can think of the guts of your program viability policies and discontinuance and how that starts and getting, if you work with curriculum, creating the taxonomy for the coursework inside of a program. And if it's something that's associated with industry, working with your partners in non-credit, or in your technical ed department to make sure you have a work group that will talk about viability and there's that piece on this side, and then the competition from outside. How fast can we do it so we don't lose the opportunity? So while we don't prescribe a particular model, I feel comfortable from my own seat, not ACCJC, suggesting just making sure that Senate, and this is because Senate is not not an accreditation standard, so I'm just sharing this with you as a recently former colleague. Senate does have a place in making sure that the policies internally are followed through either curriculum or through faculty hiring, to make sure that the college internally, the folks who have to do the work, writing program reviews, assessing courses, looking long-term at your planning, student learning outcome assessment to look at effectiveness, institutional research, that is going to happen in a way so that that program gets the same support as other programs that are currently supported. CBE is great, right? It's a great opportunity for us to forego the Carnegie hour, which in many cases for many disciplines is not an appropriate way of setting hours to determine skill. It works for many other programs, but for some things where you have to have technical hours of skill, having a coursework unit burden on top of a practical hour burden lengthens the time for a student, and they don't get the same kind of practice, right? When it could be an applied skill and they can get just in time skill building training as they're working through. There's no research that said that model doesn't work. It's just not as common as the current model that utilizes the Carnegie hour classroom lecture and then making the student take an additional set of coursework with hours on the side. There's nothing that says that can't work. So we don't really have a dog in that fight. We're like, if folks are going to do it in a way where they can crosswalk us from the Carnegie hour to that, more power to them. And the application process is open to anyone. There isn't a boundary for institutions that want to do it. If you want to do it, we are happy to support you through the process. But it really is about, like, for me, the culture inside and outside. If there's pressure to do it, I think that's really hard for an institution because it generally tends to take away voice. In California, your state, unlike many other places, faculty primacy is a law. And so having the order of operations get taken away from you can be really traumatizing, because at most institutions, voice isn't consistently given to faculty where they have primacy in the 10+1. So I'll leave it at that. I know it's a delicate conversation. I don't want to start like a war.
Yes, yeah, you handled that brilliantly. So for the next question, I'll let you stay out of that ACCJC hot seat, and everybody here, I'm sure, can already see how brilliant and insightful your responses are. So this is just for you. This is just Nickawanna's answer. Looking ahead, what innovations or trends do you foresee in the realm of educational assessment that could further enhance equitable outcomes for all students?
Well, I'm going to start with the one that'll make me the least popular. I think AI has already been here. It's already in the tools that we've bought. And since the state has funded the use of Canvas for us and Microsoft Office, it's embedded in all the tools that they already have. The repositories for checking for papers and whether students are being honorable and how they do work already relies on these systems. And it's not in an upfront way that folks are being told about it. So I think one of the things is knowing that AI has been here. It's already embedded in the tools that we've paid for, that we expect students to use. And the next big frontier is faculty, I think, really learning how to take advantage of those tools and to see the place of, like, Google and ChatGPT are already feeding student work that's saved inside of the systems we expect them to use into Turnitin. So student work that is original student work is coming back as plagiarized work. I've experienced this as a faculty member. I've experienced it as a dean, and I'm experiencing it now as students write to us, though it's not something we can do anything about because it's not in our purview, but they write to us saying, my teacher accused me of using AI, and I write to them and say, show me the work. And I said, well, this might be what's happening. Your teacher is a good person. There's a lot of technology out there. You might want to talk to them about the settings you use inside a Canvas, things like that. I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus for that because AI is pervasive. And I don't know that we are even aware of how much is happening in Canvas that is unseen to us because of the partnerships that Canvas has with many different organizations that provide its back-end support through all the tools that are used. So I think AI is actually amazing. It can offer us the opportunity to reconsider the types of work we ask students to do because it will force them to use that thing in their pockets, their phone, where they have access to the entire world's worth of knowledge in a way that's constructive. So they can learn to start asking questions again and asking about what is true, what is fact, and to question everything. Some of you might get nervous about that phrase, but I think we need to teach people to question everything so that they can come back from just not trusting anything to being curious about things. I think people question everything now, but they just go, oh, it's fake or it's this and meh. And it's like, so now the answer to whether something is true or whether something's an authority is meh. I find that more dangerous than students being irate about something because at least there's investment and you can't learn without emotional engagement. You can't, right? So whether they are in love or they're enraged, I'll take either, but they're engaged. Folks who are meh, it's like your body on the couch. You can't grow without positive stress or distress. Couch, it's not giving you any kind of sensation there. Sorry. and that's where we have atrophy. I want them, AI will allow them to use those tools and they're competing against people already using it. So, we have people from all over the world send students to American colleges because we teach people to be critical thinkers. I think this is going to level up our game and change how we allow our students to manipulate the world around them. This tool is a leveler. It allows them to do the thing that many of us, if there's Gen Xers on the call, when we wanted to ask why, and you're like, oh, I'll just figure it out myself. We're very independent. We can provide that superpower to our students with AI. Right? They don't have to have all the other Gen X issues, but the learning piece, the self-sufficiency piece, they can be inquisitive, I think the way that we were inspired to be. And I think it's good, that student agency piece, as Jarek was saying, it's good. So AI, I think that's great.
I love that you make the connection to apathy. Apathy doesn't yield to critical thinking. I was trying to think of a more critical way or better way to say that, but apathy, it is just like you said, whereas if we have students who are upset and engaged, that's where we see that critical thinking, or we can at least engage in that critical thinking because they are on fire about something. I feel that way when I'm talking to faculty is I would rather you be so upset because then we can engage versus I don't really care anymore. So I love that emphasis on trying to get out of apathy, whether it's this side or that side. Apathy is not where we want our students to be.
And to tie it back to the question of assessment, the reason why that's so important is because the types of assessments will evolve too. And if that assessment engages us, not as sages on the stage, but as learners along with them, like we're in the trenches with them digging through that conversation, we can have assessment that is about the learning moment because AI will allow us to change learning together live. If you think of the learning and experience can become live Wikipedia in our classrooms. How are we changing culture? Because when we transmit information to someone else, we are changing the culture of our disciplines. And in many cases, we as academics have had the experience in learning environments of being able to learn how to be an academic, to learn how to have constructive conversation that allows us to be able to manipulate our world, how we treat people at the DMV, how we feel on the road when we're driving each other. It allows us to learn about the different levels of interaction and intimacy that happens, both with sort of structured conversation, but also between people. The best part of taking different classes, whether it's live or online with different people, is that we are constantly I love the word cross-mogination, Austin Powers. We're constantly cross-moginating with people around disparate topics. And that's maybe the beauty of a liberal arts education. It allows us to step into the world with many different sort of frames and lenses to be able to figure out how to problem solve and to understand and to see. There's weird analogies, great analogies about the first time that indigenous people saw like a boat off the course and they didn't know what it was because we don't know what we haven't seen before. And then when they finally saw the people, they said, oh, these are people dressed really weirdly, but that we only have the framework to engage with things that we've seen. And so the more conversation we have, the more engagement we have, the better lexicon of experiences we give students. I think AI can do that by changing the classroom and how we do assessment and having that assessment be in amongst ourselves learning together versus apart. And I know that that can happen online, but right now, the way online is happening for many of our students, they are more separated than ever from each other.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amanda, for moderating this discussion. And Nickawanna, thank you for your wonderful open conversation with the attendants here. Let's continue with our program wrap up.
Thank you.
At this time, I encourage all the coaches. This is a time for us to have a friendly, open discussion on what worked, any improvements that we need to do, any takeaways that we have. And this is an open discussion. If you don't feel free by speaking now, we have the chat available. And also our wonderful Susie, our professional development coordinator, will be sending a survey out, just FYI. Susie, anything you want to add as far as the survey?
No, I just dropped it in the chat. You'll receive a follow-up email thanking you for attending, and there will be a link to the event survey in that.
Thank you. Coaches, do you want to get started or anything?
I don't know if I need a nap now or I need to go redesign all of my assessments, but I always think starting out Saturday morning, why are we doing this on a Saturday? And then I'll end and going, this is why. It is a nice way to start a Saturday. But again, I can't decide if I'm just going to go take a nap because my brain goes, oh my goodness, I'll process later because this was so much great information. So I appreciate all of our presenters today and the insight from everybody that stuck around. I know that's hard to commit on a Saturday morning.
Yep, I think for Saturday morning, you're right, Amanda. This is just, the best Saturday morning I spent in a long time. So this just certainly, I tell you, as I listen to Nickawanna's thoughts and I tell you, this is becoming a very emotional, very charged discussion, and I agree. There are topics that need to be tackled, and I think if we were to speak to this from the perspective of our speakers for the future, yep, we know where to look for them. So we'll certainly keep that in mind. That again, we have an understanding. We are really building the capacity to start moving the ship around, kind of a thing. And I'm really very, very, very happy to see how much of this of what we've been talking about in Friday SLO talks at the symposium, that this resonates with many of us. This resonates in the field. It's the focus. So moving on. I mean, I don't think we had any technological glitches except for my internet connection, but everything else was just fine. I am really grateful for Fresno City College to again put up this magnificent show. It's just been a fantastic event. I'm grateful for everyone's contribution.
Feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to speak. If you want to put anything in the chat, please utilize the chat. Bethany, Michelle, you have anything to add?
I just threw in the chat, just big shout out to Susie. I know we've said that many times these last couple of days, but she's amazing and goes above and beyond and is just so thoughtful. I had issues yesterday and I woke up this morning to an email where she got ahead of potential issues already. So she's just on it and keeps us operating as smoothly as we can. So big shout out to her.
Michelle?
Yeah, just a big thank you really to everyone who showed up for the whole, yesterday and today, especially as everyone said was Saturday being a tough day. It's just really been awesome. The presenters, such great information, great discussion. Just really appreciate everyone and the opportunity to be here and be involved. Yeah, thank you all very much.
And last but not least, Jarek, would you like to close us off?
Oh, I think, oh gosh, yes, certainly. I'll be happy to. Again, I can only let me just think very quickly from this keynotes through today's closing with Nickawanna, representing our institution, speaking to about the importance of what it is that our institutions are. We are who we are, right? That this is where the focus is. I think again, we are on the right track. It's there is going to be quite a bit of discussion, I suppose, in the future about the policy, the guidelines, the where we are when it comes to assessment of student learning, why it's important. I'm very happy to have heard that so many of our speakers have addressed the students' needs, that they are really the focal point of what we do at our institutions, not necessarily the accountability or following the guidelines and institutional effectiveness as we understand it now, but what it is that students are learning. So again, I'm just very, very grateful that those topics have been hammered down by our speakers and all of us, all the interactions. So again, thanks everyone for attending. Thank you very much for putting it all together. And we'll see you in February, by the end of February, February 29th, 27th, I think. We are starting the Friday SLO Talks. And we are looking forward to working with all of you this semester and in the future. 2026, we'll see you next year then at the symposium. Thanks again, everyone.